Ouais, ouais, très bien. C'était retard. Ouais, ouais, on a signé des accords. Ah, et d'autres, ils sont en train de des échanges de travailler sur plusieurs techniques, des choses comme ça. Bon, bah, allez, c'est super, ça va bien se passer. Yeah, so I use it. Yeah, when now with yeah, steps. We know each other. Basically, we work from the
C'est ça. Et donc, je suis là, c'est l'exercice avec un petit décollage. Si, il lance la l'élève. Est-ce qu'il y a affiché rien?
Tu veux aller là-bas?
I guess you know what's choosing.
That because of our activities,
la planète se réchauffe. Les espèces disparaissent.
海面上升 Hombres y mujeres son expulsados de sus casas.
Parce qu'ils n'ont plus de nourriture.
D'eau potable.
والأراضي الصالحة للزراعة.
No entanto, há soluções concretas.
Jobs.
betere verdeling, more sharing.
एक मुस्तकबिल के लिए उम्मीद भी है.
À Paris, en 2015.
À Paris en 2015,
les gouvernants du monde entier
On se réunir.
ومؤسسين التنمية.
والعمل معا untuk menjadikan Paris 2015
борьбе с глобальным климатическим изменением. Nous comptons sur vous.
Мы рассчитываем на вас.
Contamos contigo.
إننا نعول عليك.
我们对您给予厚望。
Contiamo su di te.
Nous comptons sur vous.
We're counting on you.
Does it work? Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Fabien Jeunesse. I'm with the Office for Science and Technology of the French Embassy. It is my pleasure to welcome you today for this conference, French American Climate TalkS in Denver, Colorado. I would like to welcome on stage Mr. Jeffrey Richards, Honorary Consul of France in Denver. Mr. Richards will open this conference.
Good afternoon. Everybody hear me? I don't want to bend over too far on this. Yeah. Great to see everyone here. Lots of friends and a lot of young colleagues, young folks. It's great to see people interested in this topic. Delighted to have you here in the summertime. Let me begin by saying, esteemed guest and esteemed panelist and dear guest, I'm delighted to be here and honored to speak to you today as the Honorary Consul of France in Colorado. We are meeting in Denver to discuss the greatest challenge of our time, climate change. Climate change is now largely recognized as what it really is. It's a phenomenon caused by human activities, affecting all parts of the world, but its effects amplifying over time. The current CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is unprecedented. In comparison with the past 800,000 years, CO2 concentration is higher than it's ever been. Species go extinct at a dramatic rate. which is 100 to 1,000 times more rapid than what is considered to have been the natural rate of extinction. Climate change is exacerbating existing risk. It is creating new risks for natural and human ecosystems, such as extreme weather conditions, massive population displacements, widespread pollution, and the proliferation of some diseases. So far, the international community has collectively failed to adequately address climate change. Following a business as usual path in the years and decades to come will only lock us on a trajectory that will lead us to a warmer, more uncertain, and more dangerous future. In order to slow down global warming to an acceptable level, it will be necessary to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions and begin the transition to a cleaner and more sustainable lifestyle. In reality, it is time for us to move from science to action, from noticing that our world is being threatened to taking decisions aiming at preventing our world and its quality of life in order to protect it for our future generations. Curbing our emissions is a great challenge, yes, but it is also a tremendous opportunity, and we should view it as such. Climate change is not a curse. The green transition represents rather a broad pool of ideas, solutions, and both innovations at solving this problem. Promoting a more sustainable model of growth and development is a chance to create jobs, ensure well-being, and reinvent new ways of producing and consuming. In order to seize the opportunity that climate change represents, we cannot miss the crucial rendezvous the world has at the end of the year in Paris. Indeed, France has been chosen to hold this International Climate Conference next December in Paris, Conference of the Parties, or COP as we know it, in order to work on a new global agreement on climate change. The aim for this conference is to establish an ambitious and consensual legal framework to limit average global warming below 2 centigrades compared to the pre-industrial level. In order to make sure that the international community acts quickly and collectively, France has decided to lead by example. The French government has engaged the country in an important ecological and energy transition. By 2050, France aimed at decreasing its greenhouse emissions by 75% compared to 1990 levels. The French government has also pledged to contribute to the Green Climate Fund with a participation of $1 billion a year in order to support developing countries to invest in clean energy transition. In addition, France is participating in conferences, seminars, and other events all around the world in order to raise awareness and trigger action on climate change. That is why we're meeting here in Colorado today. Denver is one of the important venues of this conference, and it's a series called FACS, as you know, French American Climate TalkS. FACS has been organized by the embassies of both France, in the US, and Canada. It aims to mobilize French, American, and Canadian public opinion on environmental issues, and it has been designed to encourage discussions and interactions with interested participants. FACS was launched in 2014 and has been a growing and continued success. Colorado, like any other part of the world, is already facing the impacts of climate change. In the past 30 years, this state has experienced a significant rise in temperatures, and that trend will probably worsen in the next decade. In order to address environmental challenges, Colorado has released a climate action plan, which was back in 2007. And then 2 years ago, the state legislature officially recognized the serious and diverse problems raised by climate change to the state's people, the economy, and as well the environment. Today, our discussions are going to focus on a highly important topic: the impacts of climate change on health and the quality of life. Climate change is a multifaceted problem, which can potentially affect many aspects of our everyday life. Regarding the water we drink, the food we eat, and the air we breathe, climate change exacerbates the pressure put on natural resources, which in turn affect our production and consumption patterns. In order to minimize the risk impacting our health and living conditions by environmental changes, it is necessary to bring to light and understand the complex relationships between global warming, human activities, health, and well-being. In the following roundtables, our distinguished panelists of American and French experts will discuss these complex relationships. I would like to thank them all, and I would like to thank them for their participation as well as our two moderators. Their engagement is providing better knowledge, innovation, and policy making in this crucial process. I would also like to thank our sponsors, Denver Water, the Alliance Française of Denver, and the One World, One Water Center at Metropolitan State University of Denver, where we are, who have helped in the organization of today's event. Their action here in Denver is of utmost importance. Last but not least, I would also like to thank all of you for coming this afternoon and dedicating your time to such a crucial topic. Having various organizations, ages, backgrounds in the room gives me hope that I urge each one of you, in order to preserve our own quality of life, to protect it for future generations. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Heil, Associate Dean in the College of Professional Studies at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And today I'm here on behalf of Dr. Sandra Haynes, the Dean of the College of Professional Studies, whose photo is in your program. Don't be confused that I'm not in there. So on behalf of Dean Haynes, I want to welcome you to our campus, to Metropolitan State University of Denver. We appreciate all of you joining us today to discuss our precious natural resource, which of course is water, and how climate change will affect our health and our quality of life. We are so very pleased to co-host this vital conversation. Climate change will create health and well-being issues, whether you live in Denver or you live in Paris. This event highlights our common concerns and will help identify potential opportunities to work together by sharing information. The upcoming roundtables will provide expert opinions on water and quality of life and how climate change will impact our health, topics of keen interest to all of us. MSU Denver has many programs that will be affected by these issues. Our nutrition, human services, and nursing programs will be impacted by health and quality of life issues as they relate to climate change in the future. Our One World, One Water Center for Urban Water Education and Stewardship, and we like to refer to it as the OWOW Center, was created in 2011 to help develop sustainable solutions for our water resource problems. It is part of our efforts to serve Denver and the region as an urban land-grant institution to develop knowledgeable and proactive citizens to help solve water-related problems by embracing opportunities for collaboration such as our event today. Thank you again for joining us for this very important conversation about water, climate, and health. We hope it will help all of us understand and continue the important work of planning for change. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Tom Check, who is the director of the OWOW Center and one of the moderators today.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Well, let's get started. The first roundtable is going to be on water and quality of life. And our first speaker is Lorna Cates, and she'll be speaking. The format is we have 3 speakers. They'll each speak for 10 minutes each. They have a PowerPoint presentation. We'll hold the questions till the end of the 30 minutes, 10 minutes each. Then we're going to open up for almost an hour of conversation on the topics that they present to us. So, Lorna.
I don't have the clicker. Can I have the clicker? I'm super short. I need to bring a little stool with me, portable one. Yeah, this is great. Thanks. Thanks so much for having me today, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you all today. Welcome to Colorado if you are not from the area. I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of some of the Colorado water issues and challenges, and I'm going to dive into some of the issues that Denver Water is dealing with. And of course, my focus coming from Denver Water is about drinking water. So that is our tie to quality of life. And we'll get more into that in the discussion. So this is, to orient everyone, this is Colorado, the state of Colorado. And here in black, we have the Continental Divide. And what's interesting about the Continental Divide is the water that lands on the west side of the divide goes to the west, and the water that lands on the east side of the divide goes to the east. One of the challenges in our state is that about 80% or so the water that lands in our state is on the west side, but 80% of the population lives on the east side of the Continental Divide, right? So a significant challenge makes water utilities very important in our region. So when it comes to thinking about climate change, Colorado is in the middle of the country. I think you guys kind of know where we are. And we're a headwater state. So that means water leaves our state and it goes to meet the needs of 18 other states. So water's not coming in, it's going out. And we're in the middle of the country. So when it comes to preparing for climate change and other big challenges, we're in a different situation than a lot of the other big cities around the nation. A little bit about Denver Water. We're Colorado's oldest and largest water utility. We provide drinking water to 1.3 million people. So that's a quarter of the people who live in Colorado. And one interesting tidbit of information is that we supply our customers with less than 2% of the water that's consumed in our state. So we have a very efficient and effective water program. We have 3 treatment plants. We have a recycling plant that provides non-potable water. And we have almost 700,000 acre feet of storage. It's pretty cool. So as part of our climate adaptation plan, we work directly with a lot of other water utilities. And this is really important because we want to pool resources. We want to have a shared unified voice. But we also get to learn from each other. So Denver Water is part of this group called the Water Utility Climate Alliance. And we're a group of 10 of the largest water utilities in the nation. We provide drinking water to over 43 million people across the United States. We work together to really focus on pushing the science forward to meet decision-maker needs, as well as helping encourage water utilities to incorporate climate change into their planning. We put together these 4 steps to adaptation, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. But basically, we have the step of understanding, and this is a really, really important step. I'll come back to that in a second. But then, once you start to understand that climate change is an issue, which I think everyone is now fully embraced, generally speaking, you want to see what it means to your system, so you assess it. And one of the biggest challenges is then incorporating that into your planning, because climate change is fundamentally challenging some of our basic planning principles that we've used for the last 100 years in long-term planning. And then, of course, once you've incorporated the planning, you want to implement some sort of action. But this understanding piece, this is something that never ends. The capabilities and limitations of the science is so important to understand for applied decision making. You know, oftentimes we're making decisions that are multi-million, sometimes billion-dollar decisions that are going to be in place for over 100 years. You know, understanding what the state of the science is for these types of decisions is really important, and we need to move forward with our adaptation planning. So I have these little cards. If you guys are interested, the Water Utility Climate Alliance has 2 new papers out. They're case studies. One has some sophisticated case studies on how utilities are looking at assessments, and the other one is planning how utilities are incorporating climate change into their planning and decision-making processes. This isn't just utilities in the United States, it's an international case study white paper. So be happy to share that information with you guys if you're interested. So figuring out how climate change is going to manifest locally is a pretty significant challenge. So I like to show everyone our scatter plot. This kind of looks like a shotgun went off on the graph. And this is really the state of the science that we have to use for our planning for the future. You know, so what do you do with this? How do you prepare for this type of situation? So to orient you a little bit, on the x-axis we have changes in temperature, and these are for future periods 2040 and 2070 compared to historical periods. On the y-axis, we have changes in precipitation. So all these projections are showing that our region's going to continue to warm, right? We've already warmed 2.5 degrees, depending on the time frame that you look. So we anticipate warming to continue in the future. As a water utility, precipitation is a pretty important variable, right? So half of these projections are indicating it's going to get wetter, half are indicating it's going to get drier. You know, so how do you prepare for that? What do you do when your job is to make sure that you're providing a high quality, safe, reliable water supply to a quarter of the state of Colorado? So thinking about warming alone, and I think Brad's going to go into this a little bit, but I just wanted to hit on a couple of basic points. You know, water utilities are kind of the canary in the coal mine in some of this stuff. The water system and the climate systems are directly connected. So as one's changing, it's going to be influencing the other. Denver water, the majority of our supply comes from snowpack, right? So that snowpack then translates into stream flow, and that stream flow then fills our reservoirs, and that's what we use to then supply water for our customers. So as it warms, we anticipate impacts to snowpack, to runoff, changes in drought and flood events. You know, Colorado is semi-arid, so we prepare for drought, right? You guys saw how much storage we have. So that's about 3 times our demand, right? So that's enough, if we don't go on restrictions, to be able to meet 3 years of demand without getting any more water, right? That's not how it's actually going to work, you know, but we prepare for drought. So more intense and severe droughts are going to really challenge our system. And again, remember, we're in the middle of the country and we're a headwater state, right? So all these things start to add up. Evapotranspiration, that's in soil moisture. These are 2 variables to really keep your eyes on, right? The warming is really going to be impacting these variables, and that's going to directly be impacting the water that, you know, sometimes when we have a really great ski year, you know, or a great snowpack year, and that doesn't necessarily translate into a great runoff year, you know, these are some of the things we want to keep our eye on. And then watershed changes. You know, we've experienced Colorado, if you're familiar with some of the challenges we've had, we've experienced some of the worst, most devastating wildfires in the last 15 years in our state. Vegetational changes, I'll highlight that in a little bit. Water quality degradation is a really big challenge for us because of wildfires, but also because of ambient temperature just getting warmer, right? You know, so that's going to make the water temperatures warmer. And we have regulations that we need to meet certain water temperatures, but also for ecosystems. You know, we want to maintain those types of systems in our watershed. But one of the biggest challenges, right, for water utility planning for the future is what's going to happen to demand. Right now, about half of the water from our customers' use is used outside. Are we going to get to a point where people no longer want to have yards? Where they just they're done replacing their yards. We've had too many droughts, right? We've gone too many restrictions. People don't want to pay for that anymore, and they just give up. And then all of a sudden our demand just plummets, right? Because if half of our demand is outside and it plummets, you know, and we have this, we're thinking we're going to have this huge gap of preparing for the future, and all of a sudden the gap's really tiny. You know, that's going to be politically kind of a situation. Or are we going to have people who really want to maintain that outdoor those outdoor systems, you know, for that type of quality of life? We don't really know. So this is a pretty significant unknown. You guys are familiar with all of these. I kind of covered all of them, but one thing that I didn't hit on was beetle kill. Everyone's familiar with this, but this is impacting our watersheds. And of course, aging infrastructure, right? So we have all these compounding challenges. And Denver water has a long history of preparing for the future, especially the long term. But what we've always done is we've assumed that the future was based on, well, we've looked at the future based on extrapolation of past trends, right? And that's basically fundamentally what climate change is challenging. So we took a step back in 2008 and we say, how can we really embrace uncertainty? What happens, you know, if we have a 2002 where we have a drought and we have a wildfire, and then we have a really severe rain event, which devastates our system, right? So that's what kind of happened here, right? We have drought, a wildfire, and then a whole bunch of rain, and that's what our reservoirs look like. So we have fundamentally changed the way we do long-term planning, and that is to plan for multiple different futures. And our intention with that is so that we can be prepared for whatever the future will be by looking at lots of different challenges and testing a whole bunch of strategies. We've decided to pursue scenario planning And the idea is that you have a whole bunch of uncertainties that you're up against. You develop a narrative of what those could look like in the future. You develop a strategy for each of those uncertainties and futures. And in the near term, you have some sort of common strategy, right? That is a great way to plan until you bring in climate change, right? Climate change makes the gap between supply and demand so much more challenging than any other challenge or uncertainty we could be up against, that it's so difficult to come up with a near-term plan. So our approach to this is to, we can see bullet number 2, is to identify and preserve our options in time so that we have those options available. These are supply and conservation options. So that we have them available in the future when we start to have a better understanding of what we could be up against in the future without fully developing those options. So an example of that could be buying land where we could develop storage, but not necessarily developing a whole reservoir system and making it, pulling all the plugs and doing all of that stuff and, putting in billions of dollars. But we have the land so we can act fast if we need it in the future. So that type of thinking is really how we're building our adaptive capacity, with the goal of being to really increase our flexibility so we have a more diverse system and we can meet our reliability. So I'd like to end with this graphic, this cartoon, because it's funny. But it's 2 dinosaurs hanging out, talking to each other, and one dinosaur says to the other, all I'm saying is now is the time to develop the plan to deflect an asteroid. So this is really where we are. We know what we're up against. We know we need to take some action. It's going to take a long time to change political will, to change institutional just systems. It takes a long time to embrace what this change is going to mean. So I encourage you to move forward with it. Thanks for you.
Thanks, Lorna. We are so fortunate to live in a metropolitan area where the water provider takes climate change seriously. Very fortunate. Our next speaker, Dr. Patrick Bougeron, Senior Research Scientist at UC Boulder.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to take you on a journey here. As Jeffrey Richards said at the beginning, the climate is influencing a lot of things. It's an external factor that has very complex interaction with many of the things we do. When it comes to the quality of life, I don't want to be offensive, but it really means everything and nothing at the same time. So what I'm going to do is to try to take you on a journey to show that most aspects of what we call quality of life derives from what humans have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. It's basically managing the land, water, energy nexus. We need to eat, we need to drink, we need to process things. So a very simple way to look at it is the Venn diagram. And we know, and I'm going to use what Lorna said, and I'm going to precede what Brad is probably going to say as well. We know a lot of things. We know how to manage water. We know to transform energy, whatever that means. We know how to manage the land for many things, for recreation, for habitat, for growing food. We also know, to a very large extent, we know a lot about the impact of one domain on the other, and we have models to do that. Where we start having a problem in terms of the external drivers, globalization, demographic pressures, impact of climate, is that we deal with actually the interaction between very different factors that have different drivers, different scales, different times of response. Among them, I'm going to use the term of ecosystem services, which is used a lot nowadays, but it's really the interface between the biophysical and the social domains, because hydrologic flow is not a service. It's something that provides some quantity of water. When we use it, it becomes a service. The notion of resilience, vulnerability, and thresholds, I will go through that. But this is where things become interesting, because that's where the Denver board is really good at that. We have been very good at solving what I call TEM problems that are relatively linear. Build a road, build a silo, build a reservoir. Now I think people have been saying we're running out of feasible problems to solve, and we get into those problems that have a life of their own, down. And those have been called wicked problems. They're mischievous. And the concept came from the 70s in planning for corporations. In the 90s, when we had big ecological assessments, social scientists have used it for environmental issues. And the definition is really relatively simple, and it really defines our knowledge. I have a lot of friends in the engineering world who cannot accept the concept of wicked problem, because as one of my friends said once, a very bright person, I cannot accept that a problem could not be reduced to a linear problem. Well, think again. Those are bright people. I'm not making fun of them. But this is where things become extremely interesting. And that is usually done because we talk about the social, it's dealing with the social domain. You have different people demanding different things, having different expectations. And when you solve a problem somewhere, you create a problem somewhere else, whether it's in the same area or in different areas. Climatologists have been good. I mean, a lot of people in the government of Australia, in the government of New Zealand are using actually the wicked problem to frame policy. One of the ways to think of it is uncertainty about the goals and uncertainty about the means. If you have low uncertainty in both, that's the TEM problem. You know what you want to get, it's a matter of technology or a matter of outreach. However, if you don't know where you want to go and you don't know how to get there, I call it the swamp. And that's very much where we are in many ways. When people talk about the impact of climate change, we don't talk about the same thing. We don't talk about the same problem. We don't talk about the same outcomes. In order to do something, this is something, we have 3 grants I'm working on that converge around the same problem, but are very specific. One was on energy development, one is on fire and insects in the mountains, and the other is on water sustainability. But they all converge toward the same outcomes. The first thing to do is to really frame the issue. So I'm a landscape ecologist, I'm a modeler by training. We need to understand the relationship between the biophysical systems and the social systems. And the way to do it, having climate as being one of the drivers, externality. So we are using a system, conceptual approach where we are very good at this. I mean, ecologists know what they are doing most of the time. Social scientists are very good at this as well. We know how to do it. Where we are not very good is to look at the relationships between the two and not consider them as separate systems, but as integrated systems that become what we call social ecological systems, also called complex systems. And this is where the ecosystem service come in. That means you have the natural system delivering some patterns, some processes that people require in order to quality of life, having water, having a safe environment, and so on. And that goes into the social system. One of the questions here, for instance, is if people perceive changes, are they going to change their behavior? And the other question is, well, what is the result of all those policies that we have on the disturbances or the drivers of the system? So we use that. We have a paper coming out soon on this to frame the issue in Colorado in very specific terms. The second, once you understand what the questions really are in order to address which part of global change should be addressed for, like water quantity, water quality, or the ability to mitigate hazards in landscapes, we need to understand the dynamics. When the system, we know that all systems move back and forth. The question really is, and the Denver board, the Forest Service for fire, they're all well equipped to deal with oscillations. You can predict the 20-year drought and so on. What we're not good at is to know whether we're going to have a radical change due to changing demographics, interacting with climate change, and we get to a new stable state. And that all bets are off because we have no clue historically of what happened. Once we have done that, frame the issue, understand the dynamic, then we can think at where does the weakness, what are the sources of uncertainty? So that was done for a project on fracking here in Colorado, where we look at 3 different spatial scales from a site to the region in 3 different domains, ecological, economic, and social. And we look at what happened when you have a change in one of those domains, going into and the impact on the other domains. So for instance, change in value, environment versus agriculture versus energy, the impact on the economy of towns, the impact on the level of development, and then the impact on the water table, the impact on the systems, and so on. So we were able to actually characterize the relationships, try to simplify them to the max, and then understand where nonlinear interactions could exist. The little bow ties is where we decided that the policy could be the best use in order to actually minimize the negative outcomes. So in the context of assessing further in managing for climate change and the impact on services, we use this will be a summary of what I've said, which is basically we look at what is the impact of the drivers on the vulnerability of the system and the impact on the biophysical and the social components. When do you go from the system being vulnerable but can still be adaptable, whether it's social or if it's biophysical, and when you lose the adaptability and get into what we call resilience, which is the ability to sustain a disturbance but reorganize the way it used to be. That's very interesting right now in terms of policy, locally, regionally, and internationally, is are we at a stage where resistance is futile, as we would say in the movie, which means we can't anymore persist? When do we have to transform? And then we have two solutions, actively or by default. The problem is that most of the time we do it by default, and that creates a social problem that you have in many different countries, including this country. So there are ways to do it. I'm running out of time, but basically there is what we call the triple loop learning for strategy. The business as usual, you know what you want to get, you get it, so you continue. You have some problems, but it's not that bad, so you change the policy, or you have to change the governance. And that's where the scientists need to work with the political scientists. We'll think about the wicked problem is there is no optimal solution. So we call it wicked problems, wicked solutions. And the idea is that this is what needs to be done. And the water board is a good example where they do it. It's actually managing for surprises. And this is very important. In fact, there is no right and wrong. It's something that's good for someone or bad for someone else. And then that's a matter of social. That's where we scientists stop. We just inform. In terms of cartoon, that's coming from New Zealand. That's a report actually on the wicked problem of water sustainability. And I really love this cartoon because this shows that you can have something that's good for someone. Milk is being produced, but bad for someone else. That's it.
Thank you very much. Be thinking of your questions for the next phase of this panel. Brad Udall is up next, climate research scientist at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. Thanks for being here.
So good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? I'm height challenged. Okay, I'm going to do something here. Is that better? All right, very good. So I want to thank you all for coming today. I especially want to thank the French Embassy, the Alliance Française, Denver Water that I didn't know was a sponsor, and the OWOW Center. What a name, eh? You know, our introductory speaker spoke about that perhaps this is no more important topic than any other topic we're dealing with right now. And this has been my life work for the last 15 years, working on the connection between water and climate. In the course of this 15-year career, I've done a lot of work on the history of climate change. And there's a French mathematician, the name of Fourier, who was actually the first guy to figure out that the Earth had a greenhouse gas effect back in about 1850. The French have added a lot to this debate. This effort here continues to add a lot. Their greenhouse gas emissions per capita are 1/3 of ours as Americans, 1/3. We have a long way to go, and when they promise a 75% emission reduction by 2050, you can imagine that translates to about a 95% reduction on our part to be equivalent. It is an incredible problem. So I'm going to actually talk about the Colorado River, and I want to thank some co-presenters of this slideshow, Taylor Hawes of the Nature Conservancy, and Pete McBride, who's a terrific filmmaker and whose cover slide I've stolen here. So freshwater species are the most at-risk species on the planet. Their risk vastly exceeds those on land and in the ocean. And within the West, many of our most productive areas are within about a mile of riparian areas. Lorna went through some of this. You know, we in Colorado have this problem where 80% of the population lives on the east side of the Continental Divide, and about 80% of the water is on the west. Perhaps you do not know that the Colorado River provides roughly 50% of all the water in the Front Range. And to lose that source of supply would impose an incredible burden on all of us. Here's a quick image of the Colorado, and you know, we sit here. This water goes almost everywhere: Front Range, Arkansas, into Albuquerque and Santa Fe, into Los Angeles and San Diego, into these two areas here that take about a quarter of the supply, rich farming areas. And I want to talk a little bit about right here, Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell, the U.S.'s second largest reservoir, and Lake Mead, the first largest reservoir in the U.S., and also a site called Lee's Ferry. Turns out Udalls are actually Lees. John D. Lee founded this ferry in about 1850. So he is my great-great-grandfather. You might think that's quite a remarkable achievement. Lee, however, had 21 wives. And we think he has about 800,000 descendants. So, you know, Wallace Stegner wrote a book called Beyond the 100th Meridian, and I dare you to find it on here, right? We live in the arid West, and the 100th Meridian is right there, which means our water problems are fundamentally different than anyone else's on the planet. In 2012, Reclamation, which is the manager of the reservoirs in the lower Colorado River, issued this graph. Came out of a long-term study on the basin. And you can see both supply and demand crossing in about 2007 or 2008. Obviously, you can't have that happen in the long run. We've been able to bear through it because of these large reservoirs. But you can see the future, right, where the red line demand is above the blue line. You cannot have that happen in the long run. The good news here is we still have, you still have lots of water. You just get to manage it more wisely. So we have been in the midst of a 15-year drought on the Colorado River. And if you live through May, you might wonder if that drought is still important. And yes, indeed it is. That May was the wettest May ever recorded in Colorado. In fact, it was the wettest May in the entire ever recorded in the United States, going back 110 years. It's an unbelievable event. I am sure that there is a climate change connection. I cannot tell you as a scientist how much that connection is, but climate change is affecting almost every weather pattern we're seeing, be it 1% or 90%. And here's a look at what's happened to the Colorado River flows. Here's where we signed the compact, the highest flows in the last 450 years. There's the long-term average. There's a trend line. And this drought we're in is the worst ever drought on the system. And what's interesting is that the precipitation that has caused this drought is only 40% of the next nearest drought. And what do you think maybe is the cause of that? Well, here's a look at temperatures in the areas that produce the runoff. So above Lee's Ferry, there's temperatures. Hopefully you see a trend. There's an average. There's your trend. It's a 1.5 degrees warmer. May not seem like a lot. It's huge meteorologically. By 2050, it'll be 2 to 3 times warmer than that 1.5. And if we stop emitting carbon right now, half of that, 1.5, exactly the same warming we've had, is baked in. We will get that no matter what we do. So what happens when you have a drought like this to the 2 largest reservoirs in the U.S.? Here's from 1935. We only have Lake Mead. Lake Powell comes online. It fills. We have something that looks like normal for 20 years. And boom, we hit this. And this is a combination of both overuse and a drought. It's overuse in the lower basin, and it's a drought in the upper basin states. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, hopefully you're all aware of it, issues these big assessments. This is the latest, and an image out of it. And You know, when most people think about climate change, they think of temperature. Climate change is water change. You want to remember one thing today: climate change is water change. Why does the water cycle exist on the planet? It exists to move heat around the globe. That's why it exists. It's actually a physical phenomenon that mixes heat from areas of too little to too much. We're heating the globe and we're changing the spatial pattern of that heating, right? The Arctic is heating twice as fast as anywhere else on the globe. And it's that equator Arctic gradient that drives our weather patterns in the Northern Hemisphere. So you should expect to see all kinds of changes, and Lorna hinted at this. There's a term in the water world: stationarity is dead, meaning the past is not a guide to the future. And all kinds of things will happen in our water cycle. And Lorna hinted at a bunch of more rain, less snow, wet areas get wetter, dry areas drier. There's a whole list of them. What is fascinating to me about this slide on the IPCC is 7 out of the 10 indicators on this slide deal with water, be it snow cover or sea surface temperatures or water vapor up 5%, which clearly had something to do with the floods in Boulder and Northern Front Range in 2013. You know, one of the interesting things that we actually share with France is this risk at runoff reductions in the future. These red areas indicate runoff reductions. And basically, because we sit just northerly of some deserts, those deserts will march towards the poles and threatens the Mediterranean area, threatens our area in the American Southwest, Australia, South Africa, Chile, and Argentina. This is a very robust finding, and it's one of the scary things about the Colorado River going forward. Projections I talked about, these are by 2050. Again, 2 to 3 times the fairly modest 1.5 degree warming we've already seen by 2050, let alone 2100. I mean, the 2100 numbers, if we continue on business as usual, are frankly horrifying. I mean, they're 4 Celsius, which is 7 Fahrenheit. The last ice age in Chicago that produced thousands of feet on top of Chicago was -5 C. So we're talking almost as much warmth as a climate that generated thousands of feet on top of Chicago. And I'm going to end with just a slide on projections. Reclamation, the water manager of the Colorado River, tells us maybe 9% reduction by mid-century. We've experienced 18 already. Some of that's precipitation, some of it's probably likely natural variability, but just to kind of put that in context, it may seem like a small number. I actually think it understates the risk for sure if you're dealing with a median number. And then perhaps just as importantly, and this will happen throughout the West on all snowmelt systems, is the peak runoff timing shifts. And it'll shift in the case of the Colorado by a month earlier. And so we'll go from a peak in month 6, which is June, to a peak in May. And what's less obvious about this graph, if you look at 7, look at the difference between the low and the high, their number. There's a factor of 100% between those two flow numbers, which means in July we have half the water we previously had. Lorna talked about that impacting water quality because ambient air temperatures affect water temperatures, right? And I think that's it. It's a pleasure to be here. Look forward.
I'll invite the panel to come on up, please, and have a seat. That was really interesting. I'm going to start with the first general question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. And we have quite a bit of time to have a conversation. I'm looking forward to this. First general question: how much debate is there in the science?
You're welcome.
How much debate is there in the scientific community over the existence of human-caused climate change? How much debate is there in the scientific community?
So I'd almost like to ask, is this on? Yeah, okay. Is it, so show of hands, is it 50%? 50% of scientists think that global warming exists, anthropogenic global warming exists, and 50% don't? Anybody believe that? Anybody believe 70%? 80%? 90%? How about 97%? All right, good. All right, so you all get the issue, right? I mean, this is sort of a ringer crowd here. But, you know, the media continues to sort of, in many cases, portray this as an issue where one scientist says one thing and another says another, and it's very far from the truth.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's a debate. From my perspective, having worked on large assessments in the past with the federal government and international groups, is that we don't know how to communicate what uncertainty means. And it's also the old technological engineering view of the world of command and control. So that's what I meant by the wicked problem, you know, the tame versus the non-tame problem. People would like us to tell them exactly what's going to happen, where it's going to happen, because they assume that we have very high confidence in the technology, we are very optimistic, and that we know what to ask to start with. When the problem of water was only to take the water from the mountains and bring it to Denver, that's a tame problem. And the Denver water did very good. When the problem is a problem of increased variability in the climate, interaction of fires that can increase sedimentation in the reservoirs, and multiple demands that come from like fracking coming 5 years in Colorado, then you get a problem of we don't even know where to start. So back to the public, I think we scientists, policymakers need to be a much better job at communicating that we are not magicians. We cannot tell them exactly what's going to happen, but it's up to understanding the adaptability to that.
Sure. So one of the challenges that we face is that we have a whole bunch of politics that we have to address on a regular basis. You know, so regardless of what the scientific community thinks, we have to think about what everyone else thinks. And a couple of years ago, the Water Research Foundation did a survey asking Americans what their thoughts are on climate change. And what it found is that 92% of Americans want their water utility to be a leader in climate change and climate adaptation. This is something that we did not anticipate to see, right? So regardless of what the science community thinks, regardless of what the political community thinks, people want to make sure that they have drinking water available to them now and continuously in the future. So based on that, planning for the future is something, incorporating climate change is something we're taking very seriously.
92%.
92% of Americans want their water utilities to lead on climate change and adaptation.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Questions? Yes, clear in the back.
So it was Benjamin, you know, how we have so much. Okay. Not loud enough? Pretty loud.
Okay. So the South Platte River is pretty full of water right now, but I'm not hearing from Denver Water or from others in the local governments about how we still should be conserving water. So how can we take these instances that are just, you know, they're just an instance. It's not talking about the whole ecosystem, and how do we message that so that people are aware that they still need to be conserving, that we're in a drought.
Well, hopefully everyone's aware of our Use Only What You Need campaign. So that's something that we've been trying to use to educate our community that we live in a semi-arid region, and that water isn't something that necessarily just shows up at your tap. You know, that it's something that takes a lot of work. There's obviously, you know, from my presentation, there's a lot of behind the scenes effort that goes into making sure we have high quality water coming out of the tap. It's a challenging thing to message when you have wet events, because it seems like the community, it doesn't seem like, the community has a short period, you know, memory, right? So what happened over the last month is going to be much more in their mindset versus what happened over the last year. So 2012 is kind of already out the door, because in 2013 we had extensive floods, you know, and then it got dry again, but then May has been crazy, you know, no one's had to turn on the sprinkler systems. So that's what people remember, you know. So I think personally, I think it's a fundamental challenge of education about water, where water comes from, how water works, how it gets to your door. And that's something that I think the OWOW program does, and our educators are doing, but it's really this fundamental gap in understanding.
In front, please.
Yeah, to follow up on that, it seems to me that we tend to talk a lot about what we see, so a lot about surface water, and I'm always wondering about what's happening with aquifer, whatever you call it, out of sight, out of mind. But how much Denver Water and other agencies and researchers in general understand about what's the potential there and how much it's affected? Because when you see a red event like May, if you think about it, it's washed away and then it's not there. You don't necessarily capitalize on it. But the aquifer is probably there for the longer term. So if you run out of the aquifer, it probably has a more dramatic impact, but we don't see it, so we don't think about it. So I don't know how much you, Denver Water and other institutions kind of factor that in. I have another question, but that's later then.
And perhaps the Denver Basin Aquifer in Douglas County.
So the West, I mean, water is this remarkably complex topic. You know, there are days I wish I'd studied energy because it's far simpler and it seems like a lot more is happening in that realm. You know, underground water it's incredibly important in the West. In large parts of Colorado, we don't much depend upon it. Like Denver Water, for example, does not. You know, Douglas County, however, built a huge system down there dependent upon groundwater. California is very dependent upon groundwater. There's been a lot of interesting science done recently based on a NASA effort called GRACE, which are these two satellites that orbit the Earth. And when they get over an area that is denser, meaning has less water, the two satellites are 100 kilometers apart. The first satellite goes a little faster because it gets pulled down. And that measurement between the two satellites tells you what the mass of the Earth is. These two satellites are giving us incredible information on the state of aquifers. And there have been a number of papers in the West right now that have been eye-opening about losses, especially in California and the lower Colorado River Basin, other areas where we tend to rely more on groundwater. Colorado, thankfully, I would say thankfully, is a more surface water-oriented state for the most part.
But one thing I'd like to add to that is one option we're looking at is storing water underground. You know, we talked about the impacts of warming to the surface system. So one thing we're looking at is trying to store water in the Denver aquifer, and you know, hopefully we won't have the same evaporative type losses that we will with an above ground reservoir. But then the energy impacts of that are going to be pretty significant. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, and opportunities, I guess, for the water community is after everyone has embraced adaptation, you know, it's really time to start thinking about this adaptation mitigation nexus and what is our responsibility in that realm.
So I was reminded we're live streaming today. So if you're comfortable going up to the microphone, that would be a really nice thing. But you had a question?
Yes, there have been a number of articles in the New Yorker lately about the Colorado River Basin, Salton Sea, and I keep coming across a statistic where agriculture in Colorado is using something like 80% of water and consumers a much smaller amount. And one question is there anything in place at the moment where there are water departments talking to agriculture or political agendas in place to try and manage that a little bit better?
Yeah, this is a great question. So just a little bit of background about ag in Colorado. So when you're a farmer, you're going through and doing all your farming activities, there's not a huge incentive for you to want to use less water. Because if you use less water, that means you have less water in the future if you want to sell that water to a municipality, right? So it's kind of harming your potential retirement plan or long-term plan if that's something that you're interested in pursuing. So that's a challenge. But there's a lot of agricultural communities that are coming to the water utilities and saying, hey, we are done farming. You know, our kids aren't going to take over our farms. You know, we just want to kind of get out of this. What are you going to offer us what would you offer us for our water rights? You know, so we have kind of this, it's a time when people are coming and offering it to water utilities. Denver Water is not at a point where we're going out and seeking ag water, but Aurora Water, for example, has developed a lot of relationships with the agriculture community. Now, across the Colorado, there's a really good example right now because across the Colorado River Basin, significant amounts of water are being used in agriculture. So there's a system conservation agreement where the municipalities, large municipalities in the upper and lower basin states on the Colorado River are working together to eventually work with the agriculture community to see how they can serve some of that water. So in the event that we are getting close to some sort of curtailment or compact call, that water could be available for different types of uses, right? Like drinking water needs or, baby formula type uses like that, right?
So that 80% number, at first glance seems unusual. It's not unusual. Every arid and semi-arid river in the world, around 80 to 90% of that water goes into ag. Now, 100% of the total use is by humans, right? I mean, we all eat. And so on the one hand, it's easy to blame ag, and there's a lot to blame them for. But on the other, you need to make the complete circle there and understand where that water is going. In the case of the Colorado River, especially the upper Colorado in this state, much of that water actually goes into hay, believe it or not. It goes into alfalfa and other kinds of hay because that's all you can grow in Colorado at 7 and 8 and 9,000 feet. And at first glance, well, that's an indication of what we're eating, right? We're eating beef and lots of dairy. And it's, frankly, it's an opportunity is what it is. Municipalities tend to use 5 and 8, 9% total. And the good news is if you can figure out how to get a little bit of water out of ag, you will have done a lot.
And I will go back to the nexus here because a lot of, we can find the areas where we think there is overuse of water, let's say. However, it's about production of services that people use all the time, whatever those are, and there is more than just food. So then you get into food security, which totally trumps what's happening in Greeley, for instance. If you start saying, well, like I used to 40 years ago, we should go where there is water, then there is a problem of transporting the food to where you are. So you get into energy security. It's the problem in Colorado, oil, gas development, versus depending upon a foreign source of energy. So this becomes this is why in the terms of the wicked problem, there is no easy solution. There are only solutions that may be acceptable to a certain set of constituents, and to always thinking in terms of the larger picture, but think locally. And one of the interesting characteristic of a wicked problem is that all solutions are local. They have to be accepted locally, and they are not exportable. So it's adding to the kerfuffle, as we can say, kind of the debate. However, it's doable, and that's why I'm putting the use of water for ag in the context of the larger issue of food security, energy security, and other quality of life aspects.
And unique to our Denver area, about 1 million people are going to move here by the year 2030. So in 15 years, about 1 million more people are coming here. How many people in this room were born in Colorado? Wow. If the rest of us left, we wouldn't have a water problem. We are part of the problem because we moved here, because we like it here. That creates challenges because there's another 1 million people coming behind us. Next question. And if you'd go to the microphone, please, we'll kind of just take turns if you don't mind, and this is great.
I just had a quick question about, you all have mentioned uncertainty and planning processes for the different work that you do. And I was just curious in terms of the French government versus the United States government, how is that uncertainty being approached? I mean, I could see it from my own government agency and other government agencies that I work with, that there's some planning that's ongoing for that. But I'm just curious in France, for instance, what's happening. So.
I don't know. I have an accent, but I've been gone for 30 years. So I have no clue.
No, I don't know either. I live here. I have a question about how the excellent knowledge and resources we have here could be used to help developing nations and poorer communities, even in the US, that do not have the experts locally and the resources to be ready on time. So how do we help with adaptation for communities that need help?
So in the lead into this, I thought I heard the French government announcing $1 billion commitment, right? And I don't know what the U.S. have done. You know, the old funny story about Americans, when you ask them where they want to cut government aid, it's foreign aid, right? That's what they always say. And it's like the smallest portion of our budget. I mean, we need to step up and help certainly in the scientific realm. And you know, not too many people understand that, for example, the world's largest concentration of people who work on climate, other than China, is right here on the Front Range of Colorado. Boulder has NCAR, it has NOAA. Both CSU and CU have atmospheric institutes that are associated with NOAA, the National Weather Service. Clearly, there's a lot we can do on technology, on tech transfer. You know, the cool thing about developing nations, and everybody loves this example, there's the opportunity to leapfrog technologies, right, in many places. The classic example being wired phones. You know, why do you even go there? Renewable energy, I mean, is a huge opportunity that we need to get on. And the cool thing about climate change, and this was mentioned earlier to me, I think fairly quickly, this is going to switch from being a cost to being an opportunity. And we've seen these environmental switches happen in this nation. You know, the last time was in the 70s when the environmental legislation, most of which we have, came into being. All of a sudden, I mean, people still fought it, but I tell you, you had a huge industry built around it. Being green can be a good thing.
Yeah, this is a really good question. You know, I think this is the role for the larger institutions in the United States. Part of the reason we participate with the Water Utility Climate Alliance is so that we can lead in climate adaptation and provide the resources, ask the questions, and really demand the tools and the science that is needed for utilities across the nation to be able to incorporate climate change into their planning. So I really see it as the big utilities' role to really lead the way, to make the investments that others can't, so that everyone can learn from what we do and follow in our footsteps. Another thing we do is collaborate significantly with AWWA, the American Water Works Association, and they represent a lot of the smaller utilities. So we're able to use that mechanism to send our message through the pipeline. Yeah, it's located here in Colorado. But to help move that information. So I see the role being the larger institutions really, you know, driving this issue forward, funding things, communicating on those things, but also we have the responsibility of supporting those that don't have the resources to have staff that work on this, to even do long-term planning. You know, at some point in time, just to add to this, we're going to have, the larger institutions are going to have a regional role that we haven't had in the past, you know, so having those strong relationships and having forged forward on some of these issues is going to benefit everyone.
Another question. I was going to just, I'm going to merge the previous question with that one a little bit, you know, the difference between the French and the US government. It's really, in my view, as a use participant in programs, you know, it's really this notion of how much control and command can we have in any given natural phenomenon, damming the the rivers, controlling the forest fires, controlling other things. And the difference between, I think, Europe and the States is that, in fact, there is not much difference. I think it's very heterogeneous. It depends upon the agency. Some agencies, like the Forest Service in France and Grève, still think that they can control absolutely everything. Some other agencies, like INRA, believe that it's not possible. So I think this is the idea that when you want to talk in terms of the adaptation, it's really a matter of realizing that you cannot control absolutely everything. Technology is not going to solve everything, that there are, and it's going to another concept that I think is very important. It's understanding the difference between sustainability and resilience. Sustainability in policy is to make sure that you're going to deliver a service or a set of services within a certain range, like water, and you are mandated to do that. The Forest Service is mandated to do the same thing for logs and other things. Resilience, so it's really the short term. You want something in the short term. The resilience is this ability to say, well, you have a big fire or big flood, and you still can manage your reservoirs or something. So you are going to we are not going to optimize. We are going to work at suboptimal levels most of the time, which is different from sustainability. So it's kind of a, sustainability is you get something in the short term or medium term. Resilience is your long-term insurance. And there is a conflict between the two. And a lot of people don't want to pay the long-term cost of insurance, especially because back to uncertainty, we cannot tell them when it's going to happen. And in some cases, it will not happen in a given area. So again, that's coming back to those two questions in terms of adaptation and exporting our knowledge, working with people in different countries. I think it's the idea that we cannot just export the technology and the knowledge. We need to introduce local knowledge, traditional knowledge in our way of thinking in order to provide solutions.
Yes, obviously when we're talking climate change and water, we're talking about a lot of planning has to be done. State of Colorado is developing a state water plan. We're trying to fill a 500,000 acre-foot gap in supply for that expected growth of population. So we tend to be looking a lot at the infrastructure. We're looking at the demand on the system, the supply of water that's available or potentially could be available through a variety of projects. And in my work in water over the years, there's always been this big elephant in the room. And it tends to be the other side of the story. It's more the cultural, social type end of the story, such as can we or should we put a little more effort also into controlling the growth that puts the demand on the system as part of the solution? And that's a tough question. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts might be on that. Thanks.
So great question, and one water wonks have talked about for years, right? And I mean, one of the main points that comes to mind is this disconnect between land use planning and water planning, right? Historically in this state, and many states across the West, the land use planners over here, the water planners over here. People approved these huge land use plans, you know, big new developments without talking to the water people. That's got to stop, basically. You know, it occurred to me recently that houses are a little bit like coal-fired power plants, and that when you build it, you have bought yourself a 50-year emissions trajectory or a 50-year use trajectory. I mean, you can change the house a little bit, and outdoor watering is about half of use. So, you know, for example, my wife who's here, who's a Francophile, taught French for 30 years, has built this incredible garden in our house. And it uses far less water than the grass that it replaced ever did. So you can change these houses, but you really need to do it right at the beginning. And that's part of the discussions around this plan. I mean, it also ties in what Patrick says. I mean, you want to build these communities next to, you know, mass transit, fast tracks being a really interesting example of what's going on and potentially really good things here.
Brad, can you give just the thumbnail? What is the state water plan and why should we care about it?
So the state water plan is an enormous effort that the state's undertaken under a directive by Governor Hickenlooper. And the first draft was finished midpoint this year. The second draft will come out in just a little bit, I think on July 15th. And it's a work in process, let me say. What the first draft composed of looked like something that happened in 1975, a water plan that had 2 volumes, a compendium of sort of laws and issues and a statement of the facts around water. And the third volume in 1975, which was the actual plan, it never ever came out because it was too politically sensitive. We sit there right now because the first draft had no plan. There was no plan in the Colorado water plan. The idea behind, when you talk to the governor's staff saying, we wanted to hear the plan organically. Well, we'll see when it comes out, the draft comes out July 15th. You all can contribute to this. You can go online. You don't need to be a water wonk. You should tell them what you think, what you want in that plan. You can do it as simply as you want. The final is supposed to come out in December. And if you're here and listening to water and you don't contribute, I will come haunt you.
Next question.
We used to say in energy that the best kilowatt is the one you don't use. It's about saving. And I think it's the same for water. You can save water, you can reduce consumption. I was amazed by the figure you gave about 50% of water consumption for outside activity, which is, of course, I'm sure, as you mentioned, we can change the way we are gardening. But I have a more engineering question. We used also to say in France that there are many leaks in the networks, in the infrastructures, I mean, in the pipes, and it's about 20-25% I was told in some places in France. I don't know if it's the same in the US. What is the level of leakage do you have in your pipes?
Yeah, good question. So it ranges depending on the utility, depending on the region. Ours is, we like to think ours is very efficient. And according to the, I'm not exactly sure what the national average is. Yeah, is it 10%? Yeah. And so one funny thing that goes back to monitoring, ours actually came back negative, so that we were actually gaining water through our system, through our monitoring process. So we're pretty good at our efficiency. We're exceptional.
That's a problem with your data.
Minor detail.
Next question.
Okay, so Lorna, you had mentioned that large institutions will play a greater role in regional coordination in the future, and I guess I'd be interested in each of your perspectives on regional coordination and as it's happening or not now, and what needs to happen in the future and how that is going to happen in the future. What steps do we need to take? What's missing now in order for that to be more effective? And then if there's anybody from the France side of things who could address how regional coordination is done there as well, I'd be very interested in hearing that. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a pretty significant challenge. Brad hit on one of our biggest challenges right now, which is coordinating the land use conversation with the water conversation. And that's something that we're working on. We're, really working with a facilitator, figuring out how we can speak the same language before we can even start moving forward in a conversation. So we're enthusiastic about that. And for us, it's a pretty big step forward. For the water community, I think that we have a pretty strong regional collaboration. The large water utilities meet on a pretty regular basis on a whole slew of political issues. That said, that doesn't mean we're necessarily connected with all the other conversations going on. So this is the regional conversation, defining the regional conversation, figuring out who the players should be, what it should entail, is just a continuous challenge. I heard this quote that we are silos of greatness, right? And we're working on being a community of greatness, but we're not there. We're not close. Well, we might be we're headed in the right direction. Let me say that.
And to add to what Lorna said, there is a process called integrated socio-ecological assessment. That's a process that has been used over the last 20 years that works very well. But to be and it worked in the Columbia River Basin. I was part of it 20 years ago. It worked in Southern California. It works also in Michigan right now. But usually what it does to get all the stakeholders to the table, institutions, the associations, and the public, is a big stick as well. And in the Columbia River Basin, it was President Clinton who in 1992 said, I want to have a solution within 1 year to the problems of the Northwest in terms of the forest fires, water problems. And what he wanted to know was, do we have the science? Do we have the social skills, and if not, what do we need to know? But it took the federal government to do it, and then all the agencies, all the tribes, there was a lot of diversity of actors, all came to the table because they knew that if they were absent, they would be out of the solution.
I have a question. So I have a general question. This has always intrigued me. During climate change, you can have areas that actually get wetter under climate change. So why would some areas of the world become drier and some areas become wetter under climate change?
So this is actually a robust finding out of our climate models. And, in our case in Colorado, we know that these deserts to the south are going to expand poleward, and they're going to bring their dryness with them. One of the scary things about climate change is a warmer atmosphere actually holds more moisture. It's about 5% per degree Fahrenheit. It's a lot more moisture. So if you imagine a 4 Fahrenheit warming, that's 20%, something on the order of 20%. the best way to imagine a climate change atmosphere is a bigger sponge above you. You get more evaporation, that sponge holds more, and then you end up with bigger downpours that come out when you squeeze it. And so that's part of the explanation for more floods, more droughts, and also wet areas get wetter and dry areas get drier. You know, areas, for example, the north of us, Pacific Northwest, we expect to see them get wetter, albeit probably in sequences or in events. I mean, one of the, again, a robust finding of how the cards get turned here is you're going to see a lot more drought. You actually have more days, dry days, and fewer days with precipitation. And if you think about it, if you have the same amount of precipitation, it means those wet days are really wet. But I'm telling you, some areas actually are going to have more precipitation, which makes the wet days even wetter yet.
Great job, guys. I've got a couple questions, and I'm hoping, like Chris, this is not outside your expertise, but I've got a question about, I would call it micro question of the West. Actually, no, let me say, I just visited Navajo State Park, which is, I asked the same question about people who were born in Colorado. It's the southern end I saw on the map that was of the water system in the West, and that straddles Colorado and New Mexico. Interesting place. But that aside, I think Denver Water had a slide that showed pine beetles, and from a micro standpoint, I'd be interested if it's in any of your expertise of modeling, because I think at some point you would all agree we're going to get a couple years of drought like California is having, and at some point we're going to get a lot of fires for all those pine beetles. It's going to change the erosion pattern and all the things on the west, all the west, because we have pine beetle kill all the way up to Canada. What's going to happen? What do you guys think is going to happen when we get those big fires and all that erosion?
I could have written the question. It's a very interesting question that dealing with climate change as well. We know that both the fires, the intensity and the frequency, and the pine beetles are driven by climate. They both are responding to the climate signals. The interactions between the two that you're alluding to are more or less known, and in fact the models are only as good as what we think we know. What seems to happen right now, there are different viewpoints. So I'm going to summarize the viewpoints. I have a grant on that actually. The change in fire right now is mostly due to land management. It's fire suppression for 100 years in the mountains, and it's the increase in density of houses in the lower mountains, because you increase the ignition, the quality of ignition, and you increase, there is more fuel, but at the same time, we have not seen yet the very big fires that we see in the Northwest, simply due to the climate signal. And for the pine beetle, it's also the same thing, because what's happening is you have fire suppressed forests in the higher elevations that are, the trees are water stressed, and they are more susceptible to a very large outbreak of pine beetle. So that said, we know that it's driven by the climate, but most of the changes are due to land management and the change in demographics. The interaction between the two is extremely interesting, because the paradigm has been that after an insect outbreak, you will have a higher quality of fire because of the dead wood. And that was creating a big fight about salvage logging that has been going on. There is recent work, empirical work, and that has been done by Tom Veblen at CU and by other people in Wyoming that show that's not true. Data going back to 200 years using tree rings and other data showed actually that after a pine beetle infestation in higher elevations, you do not have a higher quality of fire. If nothing, you have less, as a matter of fact. With one of my postdocs, we are modeling that, and we see exactly the same pattern, as a matter of fact, which is very interesting. So that's why I was talking about this nexus, because it's getting really complex, not complicated, it's complex. We don't know the nature of those interactions. And back to water, it is going to change the basically erosion rates, sedimentation, mass wasting, and all of that would affect not only the stream qualities, but also the quality of water for use. So that's where we need to do more research, but very pragmatic research at that point in time. But what was fascinating in the last couple of years is the evidence that right now it's still land use that's overwhelmingly driving the system rather than climate. It's going to change. We're on the threshold, but we don't know yet when. And Tom Veblen, who used to think the opposite until last year, has changed his mind on that, as a matter of fact.
I'd like to add to that really quick. Our question with all of that is what's going to happen to runoff, and there's not a clear-cut answer. It kind of depends on what basin you're in. It depends on, what aspect you're looking at. So there's not a clear overall understanding of what the beetle kill and or fire is going to mean to actual magnitude of hydrology. And we do anticipate changes to the water quality, right? But one fundamental change that's happened across water utilities, particularly in the West, is they're thinking about their watersheds as their infrastructure. So they're taking a lot more care and taking a lot more, doing much more research, a lot of collaboration, and putting investments into making sure that the watersheds are as healthy and viable as they can be. And then one variable I'd like to add to that, so we have beetle, fire, is dust on snow. Dust on snow is a pretty significant factor for us. And, in the springtime, this dust on snow factor can mean we have runoff that comes much faster and much more intense than we have seen historically.
Where does the dust come from and what are the causes?
So the dust on snow that impacts our region comes from the Four Corners area, right? And it's from the thin layer of soil in that region that's disturbed, mostly because cattle grazing practices. And the dust, it lands in layers on our snowpack. And as the snow starts to melt in the spring, those layers of dust start to come together and they become pretty dense. So we have an increase in the albedo, so that much more energy is being absorbed, right? Because it's not white anymore, it's dark, right? So it melts faster and the snowpack can, overnight completely melt. And all of a sudden we're dealing with a flood situation. And, some background, we're not, as a water utility, our water rights allow us to optimize and maximize what we can take for our customers. We're not really supposed to do flood protection. We do because it would be horrible if we flooded someone. But that's not really what we're legally supposed to be doing. So all these challenges are coming out.
And this is a good example of sustainability versus resilience. Agencies like the Water Board, the Forest Service are mandated to provide commodities, products in a sustainable fashion. And that means that if you're in a watershed, you are going to do fire suppression, a little bit of thinning, but not too much. You're not going to do lots of management. But that means that your forest is going to be denser, more susceptible to a big fire or to insect infestation, as compared to managing for resilience, where you would try to go back to what we have called the historic range of variability, where you would have fire every 60 years or whatever that is. People with their techniques to do that, or thinning in order to get to stands of trees that are structurally more resilient to insect, which means that the insect will come, but it will not be on a scale that will kill all of them. But that at the same time will force the agency to think that at one point in time, a given watershed will not provide as much water for, let's say, 20 years. So that has to go back into the planning process. But unfortunately, no agency I know of is mandated to manage for resilience. So then you go back to those guys have to report to the governor, to the mayors, or to Congress. So we have to have an equation between their mandate and what we want to do in the long term.
About 6 or 7 more minutes. Next question.
So one of the solutions, or at least temporary bridge solutions for climate change that has been proposed, especially here in the West, has been switching our energy fuel from coal to natural gas. And as I'm sure we're all aware, fracking has been hugely controversial, especially here in Colorado. There's been a lot of emotional arguments on both sides of the debate. I'm just curious from your perspective, what are the scientific implications, especially when it comes to water, of fracking here in our state?
Good question.
Yeah, great question, and not one I particularly study. So this will be a high wire act. So first off, I had I ran the Getchison Wilkinson Center at Colorado Law for about a year, and I had an intern, and we did a bunch of sort of seminars with our interns. And she came to me one day. One of the seminars was on fracking, and she came to me one day and she said, "Brad, I get fracking. What we're doing now is experiencing all the costs that we used to impose on other people, right? When we imported, we don't import gas, but we import oil, right? And there are tremendous externalities associated with oil. And we used to put that off in the Middle East and Russia and anywhere else, Venezuela, anywhere else we'd get oil. Now we're experiencing that firsthand in our own backyard. And externalities are a huge problem with water, actually. It's kind of interesting to compare the two. And I get why people get outraged about truck traffic, about smells, about noxious fumes, about noise. I mean, you got to get that right. And if the costs were fully allocated amongst that, people who live nearby these things would be compensated in some way. Yet our system allows total winners and total losers, and it's really quite unfair. I mean, that just my first statement on fracking. Second statement, and this is, I mean, it's this incredibly complex issue. You're absolutely right. It is a potential huge bridge fuel. You know, if you have a greenhouse gas emitted per unit of energy, right? You get twice the amount of energy per greenhouse gas unit out of gas as you do out of coal, and petroleum sits right in the middle there. So that's why you'd want to move to greenhouse to natural gas. That's why our emissions are down. I mean, our U.S. emissions are actually shockingly down in large amounts over the last few years. Our balance of trade is unbelievable because of this. But in the long run, and I would encourage all of you who are interested in climate change, if you have not read Bill McKibben's 2012 article on climate change and 3 scary facts in there, you deserve to read that thing, because effectively what Bill says, and what this is lost on the public, we have to stop burning carbon. The sooner we do it, the better. I mean, it's really nice to dance around this, but we have got to stop burning it. And natural gas is a nice way to get there, but it's not a permanent future for us. Water quality is potentially a big deal, although EPA just issued a major report within the last month on this and says it's a rare problem that you find it, and I think that's accurate. But you also got to gauge that against the roughly 100,000 wells that exist in Colorado, not just for natural gas, that are old and round, that potentially could leak in aquifers. I would say that the risk has been overstated, perhaps vastly overstated, but it's not zero. And you probably, in really important aquifers that people really count on, you might want to think about being very careful about.
I was part of 3 years with Yannick Perron within the room. She may answer a question about fracking and air quality later. But I was part of a project where we did this. We look at the wicked problem of energy development in Colorado, and it's not complicated, but it's complex. And a lot of it is interesting. The technological aspect of it can be controlled. But what's interesting is that at the top, the problems we had in Colorado, people not willing to have fracking, is related to a social concept that I was not aware of until recently, the sense of place. It disturbs people to see a big rig in the middle of the prairie because they think we should see bisons or something else. The risks have been they're real, they're punctual, they have been overstated on a large scale, but they're real on the smaller scale, at least in Colorado. But the same people who don't want to have gas from fracking in Colorado don't care if it happens in North Dakota. And that irks me a lot because I used to work for the Nature Conservancy. And there are some other trade-offs there, for instance, by changing the fragmentation of the landscape. I just did a study that we submitted to a journal a couple of weeks ago with colleagues from the School of Public Health here in Denver. And we look at the impact of what's the impact of ecosystem services due to fracking on public health issues. And in fact, there are some that are very specific at the well level, the pad level. That's very specific. They're there, they're real. We should not understand them. Most of the others are not unique to fracking. They're actually either linked to any sort of energy development or to any sort of land use. including water management. So it's, again, we go back to the idea of what do we want to see? And anyway, so that's, the idea to put in context those impacts and see what it does in terms of all the policies. So managing for water cannot be done in isolation of managing for energy development and vice versa.
This is actually just a follow-on comment to the question that was just asked. I work for the EPA, and I'm familiar with this study. And so just a couple of observations that are worth making, I think. One is that people do often link fracking to the bridge fuel of natural gas, but in fact, more fracking is occurring right now for oil development, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. And the second thing is that, as Brad indicated, the EPA study did find that there's a relatively rare number of instances where we have been able to document that impacts to groundwater or surface water used potentially for drinking water have occurred. However, the other important thing that often is left out of the headlines is the paucity of data that really allow us to make that type of an assessment in many, many cases. So you kind of need to have both of those pieces of the equation, I think. And I just a related piece of information came from U.S. Geological Survey, who recently looked at watersheds in which oil and gas development is occurring. And if oil and gas development is occurring, fracking is occurring because it's occurring virtually in all development. And what they found is that for surface waters, only 16% of the watersheds experiencing development had enough baseline water quality data that you could assess whether or not a change, and they were focused on TDS, I believe, but whether or not a change was occurring. So I think a huge thing that is highlighted to some extent in EPA's study is, do we really have the information that, that we need pre-development to be able to understand the impact? So just a couple of comments.
Absolutely. Should we finish with one more question? Or you have one more?
Yes.
One more, final question.
Thank you. So I have a question about the global scale, because climate negotiations, as you know, they involve states, and climate change impacts a wide range of actors, including non-state actors, non-state entities, such as water, for example. So the voice of water should be heard at the global level. And my question is, if you have one key message to deliver to the US negotiator at COP21 next year about the importance of water at the global scale, what would you tell that negotiator?
Very good.
So Brad kind of already stole this, but our message is climate change is water change, over and over and over again. It's the message that I use with our board. It's the message I use with our staff, all of our customers, and all of our stakeholders. I'll repeat it. Climate change is water change.
I would do you one better, though. I would say climate change is change in absolutely every single service we get from natural systems, and that it's going to impact every single behavior that we have. It does not have to be right or wrong. Again, as I said, it can be good for someone, bad for someone else, but we have to think that way. What I found, again, interesting with the wicked problem, because all solutions are local, we go back to the old conservation saying, think globally and act locally. And my recommendation to the negotiators is, do not try to prescribe locally regulations or behavior that you don't even understand. The negotiation need to be really scaled at, them should be international global issues, greenhouse gases, things like that. But locally, those things have to be modulated by culture, acceptance, and also the biophysical. Lorna was talking about the fact that we cannot even model sedimentation rate in the mountains because it takes a lot of modeling to do that type of thing. That's a local solution.
So Lorna stole my line, which I'm thrilled by, because I've been using that for about the last 5 years, and I'm happy to see it's gotten picked up elsewhere. If you solve climate change, you go a long way to solving water problems. And that's another way of saying that, but I think one of the interesting aspects of water problems right now is they're sort of leading climate change. you hear water crisis globally, right? And it's everywhere. It's China, it's India, it's Australia, it's here. Any semi-arid place has a water problem right now. It's a population problem, it's an over-extraction, it's invasive species. I mean, it's everything. And perhaps, I mean, energy poverty is a big deal, but water is probably a bigger deal for more poor people around the planet than any other issue. Solve climate change, you go a long ways to solve a global water crisis.
So we're going to have a 5-minute break, and we'll meet here at 4:20. Thank you. Thank you to the panel and to Tom. Thank you very much.
I know, I didn't realize that you were right behind me either.
I didn't recognize your ponytail.
Yeah.
How are you? Good. How you doing? Doing all right. You gonna make it over Saturday?
I think so. We had a little bit of a monkey wrench in our plans because, on the good news, we sold our house.
Good.
The bad news is he wants us out immediately. Usually you get months. He wants us out by Monday. So we accepted his offer on Sunday, and he wants us out by Monday.
It's not very reasonable.
Yeah, but he's given us a cash offer of a tremendous amount of money.
Oh, well, then there's incentive.
Yeah, 30K more than we asked.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, we need to give you my coordinates before we.
Okay. I worked with Patrick when I was at RTP.
Oh, really?
Yeah, on the EMAP stuff, landscape
Oh, wow.
ecology.
Wow.
Long. We both had dark hair back then. Well, yeah, I hope you can make it.
Yeah, so
Sounds
we're
like a very-
the movers are coming Saturday morning, and we have to be basically out Saturday because the cleaners are coming Sunday. But we were able to hire movers, and we really don't have that much stuff, so I think we'll be able to do it. We were worried because we couldn't find any movers, actually.
You'll be able to tell us exciting stories.
Yeah.
You'll be ready for a painkiller.
Yeah, right, exactly. Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to have other get-togethers too. We had several last year. The planning, so it's the thing to do.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, my wife is really psyched about the trip.
Excellent.
Me too, really good.
Yeah, I have a guidebook I don't know if you've got anything, but if you don't have to buy anything. I have a guidebook you might want to peruse through when you get some time when you settle in.
We did. We sailed down there 2 years ago, so
You
we're,
did,
we're
that's
familiar.
right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're familiar with the area.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot that. So you're hungry to go back.
It's beautiful, yeah. It's a fun place to sail. Yeah. So, okay, well, I was worried that the French were really serious when they said 5 minutes, but...
Say let me.
Yeah.
I was really happy Ian spoke up. I was going to comment to Bloom myself, but there's so many unknowns. It's like everybody says it's safe, doesn't know what they're talking about.
Right.
So
You don't want to move slow.
Well, and that's the rapid pace of the development is disturbing, and that what's understanding what's safe and regulations to standards that doesn't keep the same pace. So,
yeah. The answer is the same until it's not.
We're going to stop the second one table. Give it a little effects or just vastly overlooked.
Okay, everybody, let's get started on the next session. It's going to be really hard to follow up all of that wonky water wizardry, but we have a really exciting topic coming up in the second session. So let's get seated, and
But it requires
we'll
a lot
get
of energy
right
to
to
create
our
it.
speakers really shortly. The second round table for today in this great topic of climate change is also a very interesting nexus issue. It has a lot to do with the nexus between human health, which includes ecological health, and climate change. And so we have some really excellent speakers here. I want to do a couple of public announcements. First of all, I am so excited to be here and see you all. Thank you for coming. Some folks, like some of our speakers, came from far away just to talk with us, and that is a really wonderful thing to think about. And the other thing is that this is, as you all know, a build up to the negotiations that are going to happen in Paris in December of 2015. So we'll be thinking about that in context in all of the sessions and hopefully some of the questions that you bring up. The other announcement is that on the bottom of the screen, you see a little hashtag. I don't do a lot of tweeting because it frightens me, but a lot of other people do a lot of tweeting, and I encourage you to do that. Reach out to your contacts, families, and networks and let them know where you are and what you're doing, because it is incredibly important. Thank you. My name is Nat Mulo. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency in Denver, located here in Region 8 that covers the 6 states of Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Colorado, and Montana. I am so glad to be here. I was asked by Chris Poulet to participate as moderator, and I am so honored to do that. I am a NEPA program evaluator, but I am also the region's resiliency advisor. And I worked very closely with some folks who are in the audience from the governor's Colorado Recovery Office and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment on the state of Colorado's resiliency framework, which is also online and one of those things that you can all go publicly to comment on. That is a really amazing effort here, and it is very closely linked to climate change, because we all know dealing with climate adaptation and mitigation is part of being a resilient community. Colorado's resiliency effort is really exciting. It's very unique in the nation. There is no other state that is doing an all hazards resiliency framework initiative and is doing it statewide. So it's a very ambitious and unique effort, and it's a great one. It makes me also glad to be here in Colorado. Check it out. You can find it at Colorado United website. I would like to do just a really brief introduction of the panel, and I would encourage you to go into the brochures and the conference information. They have rich backgrounds and they are really knowledgeable, and so I'm very excited to be able to introduce them. First, Frank Korsham. Close? He's a senior research scientist at the Laboratory Ecologie Systématique and Evolution at the University Paris Sud, and he is going to be talking to us first. And I think you'll see a really clear nexus between climate change, ecological health, and of course we all know that that nexus translates to public health for people. And then Dr. Ben Beard, he is Associate Director for Climate Change at the National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases. He has a very rich career with the Center for Disease Control and many other
endeavors in his career, so it's really an honor to have him here. And last but definitely not least, all the way from Paris very recently, so we're very glad to have her come and speak with us and make that effort to travel. Not that the others didn't make an effort. They came from California, and then there was that hazardous travel from Fort Collins down I-25, which is very dangerous and frustrating sometimes. Is Stephanie Schutt, an epidemiologist at the Center Virchow-Vermeer for Public Health in Paris and Berlin. Definitely talk with her afterwards also about some of her specialties related to climate change and nutrition and diets. Very interesting backgrounds with an awful lot of powerful history and research here. And so I would just invite them to come up and we will begin the discussions and the roundtable. We'll have a little bit of conversation and questioning in the roundtable, 10 minutes each presentation, but then also making some relevant comments and connections to what's happening here in the state of Colorado. Thank you. And why don't you join?
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the French Embassy right on time, and all the French Alliance, the OWOW, and the university for organizing this, and you for coming. So I work in Paris at the CNRS, but I'm on sabbatical at UCLA, Los Angeles at the time, which explains my office, right? And my specialty is ecology and biodiversity. I'm going to because I'm the first to introduce this session, I'm going to make a broad overview of the connections between climate change and health. And I will only allude to the importance of biodiversity, hoping you will take the opportunity to ask questions on that later on. So what's the key issue here? It's that climate change affects the environmental determinants of health: clean air, safe drinking water, sufficient food, and secure shelter. That's the main issue in a few words. So there are many aspects of climate change. We've seen that it's a lot of water, but it goes in many different forms. And because there are many different issues, there are many different ways it translates into processes that are going to affect health. And so there are a lot of different health issues that are related to climate change. So obviously we don't have time to discuss about all of them. I'm going just to give you a few examples to show the main aspects. And the things that I work more or less remotely on are only those in red, and mostly changing vector ecology in terms of climate change. I work also on a lot of different things about climate change. So first, extreme heat, that's mostly what people think about when they think about climate change. So we know that it contributes directly to death, and we've had a direct example in Europe 10 years ago with a heat wave in summer that caused over 70,000 excess deaths. So that's a lot, and it's not the most extreme heat wave that we've had or that we are going to have. Air pollution, we know that smog and pollen-related allergies both are expected to be more severe with climate change, and that high temperature raises the level of pollutant in the air that are going to exacerbate some diseases. Also, we know that pollen and other aerosol allergens can trigger asthma, and with climate change, we are going to have an increased length and severity of the pollen season. And we have already starting seeing that. There are data that show that on average, since only the two last decades, we've had an increased pollen season of 15 days on only 20 years. And also we know that new allergenic plants will establish in the US as climate becomes favorable to some of these plants. Altered rainfall patterns, we've talked a lot about the importance of water. So there's an increasingly variable rainfall pattern that are going to affect many aspects of the supply of fresh water. And we know that lack of safe water can compromise hygiene and increase the risk of some diseases like diarrheal disease, which are very important in many parts of the world. On the opposite, water scarcity leads to drought and famine in the extreme cases. And we know there are some models that show that climate change is likely to widen the area that are affected by drought. The frequency of extreme drought is likely to be doubled in some places, and the duration is going to be much increased. And this is connected to all the types of extreme events or natural disasters, as some are called, like flood, drought, cyclones, tornadoes, wildfires that we've just mentioned in the previous session. And we know that climate change is going to increase both the frequency and the amplitude of extreme events. Every year, these disasters already result in over 60,000 deaths, mainly in developing countries, but not only here, it's in the States. And these extreme events are going to cause a new type of refugees, world refugees that are called climatic refugees. There are already a lot of them. Different estimates give ranges from 25 to 50 million worldwide, and estimates go from 150 to 200 million by within 35 years, and that's a lot. Food security, that's also an aspect that is really important. It's related to crop production, to biological invasions, and to fisheries. We know that rising temperatures and variable precipitation are likely to decrease the production of staple foods in many parts of the world. And this will increase the prevalence of malnutrition, which is already causing a lot of death yearly on different parts of the planet. But in addition to death, this will pave the way for further health issues like epidemics, for example. Here, just for the example of crop, the result of a study that shows by 2050, the changes in agricultural yields due to climate change, you can see that some areas are in green, that's where it's going to be better, and some areas are in red, and that's where the crop yields are going to be lower than they are now. So a lot of heterogeneity, but you can see that in the States and in Colorado, it's not green everywhere. Food security is also fish, the fisheries. You can see on this graph that there are two different types of things that can happen. Here you have temperate and subtropical oceans. Here you have tropical oceans. And as the temperature of the ocean increase, the fish go polewards to meet their climate niche. And therefore, where we used to have in temperate regions a lot of temperate fish and a few tropical fish, we're going to have fewer and fewer temperate fish to have only subtropical fish. But in the tropical regions where the temperate fish are not going to go, we're going to have fewer subtropical fish and only tropical fish, and the warmer niche of them, those who live in the warmer niches. So we know already that we're going to have much fewer in terms of species. But in addition, we know that there are other factors that are going to play a lot in fisheries, like coral bleaching, change of currents, and mostly overexploitation. And all the predictions converge towards a global collapse of many fisheries throughout the world. And some have already occurred. Many fisheries are already overexploited. And not only we're going to lose a lot of species, but we're going to lose the larger species. So this graph shows that as the time goes, what is the staple of the fisheries is smaller and smaller fish, and we are going down the trophic web when it comes to fisheries, and we are now fishing shrimps, small shrimps.
more than big fish. And this is really important because approximately 3 billion people in the world rely on seafood as their primary source of protein. So we know that climate change is going to affect both crop and fishery. Now, patterns of infection, another category where climate change is going to affect health. Climatic conditions strongly affect viral and bacterial reproduction, as well as waterborne and animal-borne diseases. In addition, they are likely to increase the transmission rate of some airborne or waterborne diseases. They are likely to lengthen the transmission seasons of important vector-borne diseases, and also to alter their geographic ranges. For example, malaria, which is transmitted by some mosquitoes, they kill almost 1 million, about over 800,000 people every year. And there is a fear, actually there are models that show that the mosquitoes are going to invade regions that are becoming climatically suitable for them, which are now not suitable because of cold winters, but that are going to be suitable in the near future. The tiger mosquito, that's a photo of the tiger mosquito. That's a carrier of many viruses, including dengue fever, West Nile fever, yellow fever, encephalomyelitis, and chikungunya. And changing climate has already given it access to half of the states of the US. The spread is continuing, and there is also a concern that more people are going to be affected by diseases, including those. So I'm not going to go too deeply into that because, as you see, there are many different aspects of climate change related to health, and it will take a lot of time to go to all of these. Some are really important, some are less. But what I wanted to point out is that one small arrow among all of these is biodiversity loss. So obviously, I'm not happy that it's only a small arrow because I work on biodiversity loss. That's my main topic. So I would like it to be more important. But biases apart, I think it's a pity because it's really important. Biodiversity loss. The models that are accepted now are that a fifth of all the species living on Earth could get extinct following climate change within 100 years. That's 20% of all the species. One mammal every 4 months could get extinct. 1 out of 8 birds could get extinct because of climate change. And of course, there are other causes that would endanger other species. And why is it important? That's important because human societies, collectively and individually, rely on biodiversity for their well-being as well as for their very survival. We, for example, here, food, we eat biodiversity. We don't eat rock, we don't eat metal or plastic. Everything, every single thing we eat comes from living species. Medicinal resources, that's also a major source of medicine. 70% of all active ingredients in the medicine we take comes directly from plants that are collected in the wild. So when we think medicine, we always think chemistry, but in fact, no, it's biology, and it's natural, and it's species that are collected in the wild. So it's really important that we preserve biodiversity for health. Raw material, so it's important. Pollination, biocontrol, soil fertilization, everything here is related to agriculture, among other things. So if we only take into account health, biodiversity is really pretty important. So in conclusion, the issue of health and climate change is, I would not say really complex, but it's really dense. There's a lot of things. And in here, you can see that biodiversity is not really something that is prominent. But biodiversity is going to be the basis on which human societies are going to continue living as they have been since humanity emerged. Climate change is going to affect health at the international level. Some countries are going to be more affected than others, but it's a global issue. It's really important to tackle it as a global issue. It's going to be also related to economics, and perhaps that's more of an incentive to tackle it as a global issue for the countries that are not directly concerned as much as some others. There is a huge cost that is directly related to direct economic costs of health. And in conclusion, although it is true that some benefits are going to occur following climate change, with, for example, fewer wheat and death, and increased food production in certain areas, the overall health effects of changing climate is going to be overwhelmingly negative. So it's really important to take that into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to for being here, and I want to thank the organizers and Nat, and as organizer for our panel here, and the sponsors for the conference as well. And I was the one that drove the hazardous route from Fort Collins here today, or one of the ones who did, perhaps. I work in CDC's Division of Vector-Borne Diseases, and my paid daytime job is branch chief in vector-borne bacterial diseases. My unpaid night job is associate director for climate change for the infectious diseases part of CDC. So with that, I can advance this. Where do I? Not sure this is advancing. Do I have to point it at, okay. All right, thanks. So I like to look at the issue of climate change through a lens of what we call One Health. It's the whole idea of concept of the interaction or intersection between animal health, human health, and the environment. And so changes in climate lead to changes in the environment, which result in changes in the incidence and distribution of diseases that are associated with the environment. And so the type of climate-sensitive diseases we typically think about are, first of all, zoonotic diseases. These are diseases that can be spread, they're harbored in animals and can be spread from animals to humans. Vector-borne diseases, these are diseases that are transmitted to humans through carriers or vectors, particularly mosquitoes, ticks and fleas and things like that. Most vector-borne diseases are also zoonotic diseases as well, with the exception of a few like malaria. We also think of waterborne diseases, foodborne diseases, and soil and dust-associated diseases. So the way this works, climate, weather, and infectious diseases. Climate affects the distribution and abundance of disease pathogens and the vectors that carry those, and also the animal reservoirs as well. Climate variables, particularly temperature and rainfall, affect disease transmission by impacting the replication rate of both the vector and also the replication rate of the pathogen, and also in survival of the disease agents in animals and the vectors and in the environment. And so climatic perturbations, and these can be severe storms or patterns like El Nino, these can affect disease occurrence patterns and drive outbreaks. So what I'd like to do is use Lyme disease as a case study. Lyme disease is one of the areas that I focus on in our work. It's not a problem here in Colorado. The tick that transmits it's not here, but it actually serves as a very good example of what types of things that we see in terms of the impact of climate variability on disease. It's caused by a spirochete bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi. It's transmitted by ticks, Ixodes ticks, Ixodes scapularis in the eastern U.S. and upper Midwest, and Ixodes pacificus in the West Coast. The reservoirs for the disease agent include small mammals, typically field mice, chipmunks, also squirrels, and in some cases birds. The host for the tick, for the immature stages of the tick, the host is generally small mammals, and this is how the tick becomes infected. And then deer and other large mammals are required for the adult ticks and for establishment of the tick's life cycle. Human illness can range from fever and fatigue and rash to potentially fatal carditis and facial palsy and arthritis late in infection. And just to look at a few numbers at CDC, we're into reported disease numbers and things like that. And there's some 60 or 70 reported diseases in the U.S. And what that means is when that disease is diagnosed by a physician, the physician is required to report that to the county health department typically, or city, and then they report it to the state, who reports it to us. And then we track those on a national level. And the interesting thing you can see from this slide, if you look just at the snapshot of 2013, these are the reported vector-borne diseases. And then if you look at the median and the range from 2004 to 2003, almost in every case, 2013 numbers were above what we see as the average. And then what we see with Lyme disease particularly is this increase that you see here going back to 1996. And actually this number would be higher, but it's affected by some reporting artifact in some of the states that have changed their reporting practices to numbers to CDC. But you see the steady increase over the last 15 or 20 years. And this slide is just to show that it's not just with Lyme disease where we see this trend. We see the same trend for all of the reportable tick-borne diseases, which is pretty remarkable. You see here Babesia, and then these lines are Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, and then Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever. So all of the diseases are expanding the same way. And it kind of goes a little bit beyond what I have time to talk about to discuss all the different drivers for this. But this map that shows the expansion of Lyme disease geographically actually is more telling than the case numbers themselves. With Lyme disease, it's very significantly underreported. The actual number of national cases is closer to 300,000 cases a year because it's about tenfold underreported. But if you look at the regions, you can see how much it's spread in the Minnesota, Wisconsin area, and then in the U.S. across the state of Massachusetts or Pennsylvania here, Massachusetts here, and then up the eastern seaboard. So how this works, climate and primarily minimum temperature defines the limit of the northern distribution of these tick vectors for Lyme disease. Warmer temperatures may increase the reproductive capacity of ticks. There have been some studies that have shown that looking at the basic reproduction rate, showing that with warmer temperatures, the rate's higher, so you get expansion, introduction of the ticks into new areas, and greater densities of populations. And then higher moisture levels also allow ticks to survive in warmer environments. So in the southern part of the U.S., actually those temperature thresholds could be deleterious to the ticks, but the humidity, the higher humidity rates actually allow them to survive there. So temperature and moisture affect the feeding behavior. When ticks are feeding, they have this behavior called questing. They crawl up to the top of vegetation, stick their arms out, and grab anything that comes by. And so this behavior is actually also stimulated by temperature, humidity. And then finally, temperature is measured by cumulative growing degree days, affects seasonality of disease. And we've done some nice models looking at the way this added cumulative temperature can have an impact on the development of ticks and on seasonality of disease, pushing seasonal exposure up, in some cases 2 to 3 weeks that we're seeing earlier in the season. And finally, when you talk about climate change and vector-borne diseases, it's actually one of the first topics that always comes up when people think about climate change and health. They always bring up the examples of vector-borne diseases because we typically think of rainfall and floods and mosquitoes and things like this, and there's a very clear link to weather. The difficult thing, though, it gets into this area of what we call attribution because clearly there are a lot of other drivers of diseases such as Lyme disease. And if you look at this map, you can see at the same time it's been expanding very particularly north. It's also been expanding south as well. And so it kind of begs the question, what are the drivers for this? And if expanding deer populations, suburban sprawl, the land use changes in land use patterns. All of these things are having a big impact on Lyme disease spread. But if those are working in all directions, then how do you attribute the impact of climate change to distribution when you've got all of those other factors driving it in all different directions? So it makes it very difficult for us sometimes to model these things in predictive models in terms of how this is likely to expand. So the illustration I like to use to kind of wrap this all up together is a model from the Institute of Medicine 2003 report. It's a convergence model for emerging diseases. And if you think about the black box of disease emergence, whether you're talking about Ebola emergence in Sierra Leone and Guinea and Liberia and places like that, or Lyme disease in the United States, it happens at the interaction of the microbe and the person. But there are other driving factors such as genetic and biological factors that have an impact both on the genetics of the microbe and the susceptibility of the human to infection. There are ecological factors that are involved, such as land use patterns and these types of issues. And then also at a larger scale, social, political, and economic factors and physical and environmental factors. So this IOM report actually identifies 13 some odd different drivers of infectious disease emergence. And I had these in green just because it's a little bit easier, or in some cases much easier, to see how climate would have an impact on these drivers. But, you know, there are a number of other drivers as well. And you can look at the impact of climate change directly on the disease. But at the same time, climate is having an impact on human demographics and behavior, as our last speaker mentioned, with climate refugees, people migrating from areas of severe weather to other areas. And so all those factors can have an impact on disease emergence. So again, it kind of gets to the uncertainty in a lot of the models and how you attribute climate change as a single factor to disease emergence. So in conclusion, infectious diseases, and particularly vector-borne and zoonotic diseases, are significantly affected by climate change. An integrated understanding of climate ecology, epidemiology is also, all of these things are critical for predicting and also averting the potential outbreaks that may occur. Preparation to prevent, mitigate, and adapt to emerging infectious disease threats related to climate change includes such things as a continued investment in disease surveillance so that we know trends and are following outbreak patterns and have a sense of what things are changing and where and how. And then related to this is a maintenance of strong national public health system. And by national, I don't mean just federal. I also mean state and local health departments all across the U.S. that are very critical in being in touch at a ground level and detecting events such as new diseases that are occurring in new areas that have been introduced or expanding. And then finally, an investment in environmental data collection. And a lot of our colleagues are working on this. There's the USGS climate science centers, and NOAA has their RESA centers around the country, and NEON, the National Science Foundation, supported programs collecting environmental data. All these efforts really are hugely important, together with a greater investment in disease modeling to be able to have some idea under these different climate change and emission scenarios, what types of things to expect in the future. So with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation and for the organizers. I have a public health background, so I'm going to talk to you as a public health professional. And the topic is climate change and health, impact and health co-benefits, and the challenges to explain that in 10 minutes. I would like to acknowledge also the Professor Antoine Flahaut, who's professor in public health, and I'm working with him on that subject, and he's also the director of the Center Virchow Villamé for Public Health in Paris and Berlin. Okay. So first of all, coming from a health perspective, there is actually evidence of climate change and its impact on health, and the evidence continues to increase. If you see the IPCC reports, the first ones and then the last ones, actually the evidence on health increases a lot. In 2005, there was the Nature putting on the cover page climate change, and a few years later, there was the Lancet, the medical journal, who put climate change on its cover page, stating climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. So actually, they published a series of articles. It was the Lancet Commission in 2009, and the main message was what is good for the climate is also good for the health. And there is actually not enough evidence to support this. I'm gonna quickly introduce, or it's actually a friendly reminder of the impact of climate change on health. So we've got climate change, which actually already has been introduced by Frank. So we have all the human exposures such as heat waves, floods, storms, gradual warming, rainfall changes, sea level rises. And then we've got mediated effects. Actually, the schema has been developed by Thomas McMichael, an Australian, who actually at the very beginning he put he explored actually the impact or the association between health and climate change. So we've got the mediated effects such as pathogens, which has been introduced by Ben, air pollution interaction, food insecurity, and so on. And then we've got the direct effects from heat waves straightforward to stroke, cardiovascular diseases, and well, I think don't have to go that into detail because you already have had an introduction to that. So some numbers, health impacts of climate change has been estimated by the WHO, by the World Health Organization, that there is approximately 250,000 excess deaths by 2030. This is also a quick reminder. This shows actually the cumulative emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. If you see Europe is a little bit, it's quite big because in Europe we have a lot of greenhouse gas emission, and also North America is quite big. And then if you see the impact actually on mortality due to climate change, it's completely the other way around. So Europe, you almost can't see Europe anymore, and North America, it's the same, but it affects really the 1,000 countries. So that's why climate change is also an issue of equity and social justice. We have already talked about the heat waves in Europe. I don't know, do you know the increase of global warming at the moment, the average of the global warming? Yes, that's true. In France, we have 1.2 last year. So yeah, just a quick reminder. And yeah, we had in 2003, we had a big heat wave, which caused 70,000 deaths in Europe. In the US, heat waves is also a big issue. For example, there was the heat wave in Chicago that caused 700 excess deaths. There was also in Los Angeles, they projected to have an increase of 62 to 88% in heat-related mortality by 2080. And I actually find that in the press recently that also in Colorado, climate change Colorado is preparing for heat wave deaths. So I just wanted to draw your attention that climate change is a big issue for the vulnerable population, because it's mostly, especially in Europe or in the US, it mostly affects elderly or the socially disadvantaged people, but also workers that work outside, for example, that can't really protect against the heat waves. But we shouldn't forget all the other world regions that I just mentioned before. So coming from a public health perspective, actually, I don't know if, are there a lot of public health professionals here? Okay, not a lot. Okay, so I hope I'm gonna make it understandable. Actually, coming from a public health perspective, we have with climate change, we have actually something in common. For us, primary prevention is equal to climate change mitigation, because we try to put some efforts to slow down, to stabilize climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which also has an impact on health, but I'm gonna come to that a little bit later. But so in terms of climate change adaptation, it's, for us, coming from a public health perspective, it's the secondary and the tertiary prevention, because someone is already dead, so what can you do? Adaptation, treatment, and so forth. Which is for climate change, for example, emergency preparedness. So coming to the health co-benefits, there was the general director from the WHO stated in 2009 that while the climate effects of mitigation measures are long-term and dispersed throughout the world, the health benefits are immediate and local. So this should actually motivate the people by changing the behavior and yes, by changing the behavior. So what are the co-benefits in general? Not only the health co-benefits, these are the indirect benefits of greenhouse gas emissions reduction that have at the same time economic, social, environmental, or public health, or any other benefits of global warming mitigation policies. So you have mitigation policies in several sectors, such as housing, transport, electricity, food, or agriculture. So just wanted to show you the mechanism of health co-benefits the way we understand it. So you've got here the baseline burden of disease. So the people that, in any case, if there's no climate change, we always have people that are sick. So, and you've got here the potential, actually, health impact of climate change. If we don't do anything, it's going to increase to actually the baseline burden. So if we're going to introduce now the mitigation policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then we have that health co-benefits on a local or regional area. And this is actually the health impact that can be averted by mitigation policies. And this can be avoided by adaptation policies, not policies, by adaptation strategies. So actually, if we put adaptation and mitigation at the same time, we can actually remain the baseline burden of disease and not having really a line, a peak of diseases. So I just wanted to give you a quick example of what I've just said. So you have the climate change, greenhouse gas emissions due to climate, causes climate change. And these greenhouse gas emissions, which we already heard from some participant, actually can be caused by the food system activities. Actually 18% of all global greenhouse gas emissions are due to the livestock sector. So, and if you have a high intake of food of animal sources, that actually has an increase on any disease such as cardiovascular disease. So if we then implement any policy strategy that actually change the realistic changes of diets of the population, meaning not being all vegetarian, of course, but just at the moment in industrialized countries, we really eat too much red meat and there is not a lot of meat for all the global population. So if we make realistic changes due to the WHO dietary recommendation, we may actually reduce the greenhouse gas emissions up to 40%. So these are estimations for the UK. And this actually has an health co-benefits because we may reduce 12% of the incidence of coronary heart diseases, diabetes, or cancer. Just quickly, it has been estimated actually Health and Environmental Alliance, which is based in Brussels, they calculated the economic value of co-benefits. So if we actually implemented that mitigation policies, what kind of, what can we actually gain of money? So for mortality, the added benefit from a 30%, if we reduce 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, so we would have a gain of 3.5 million euro, for example. Yes, I just wanted to, I'm almost at the end, I just wanted to draw your attention to the new Lancet Commission, which just came out yesterday. And actually they did a report of 53 pages on health and climate change, policy response, really making the focus on policy, because actually if you want to motivate people, or if you want to change something, it's good to say the impact of climate change on health, but I think it's also good to give people hope, as we already said, give an opportunity and saying, okay, it's not too late, we can change something. So yes, so there were some press release in Le Monde on that issue, and also in The Guardian and any other press. So the main message was, as I already said, it's not too late. The message should be positive, and there is opportunity to lead, to give leadership, and yeah, the chance also to connect climate change with health, and because this is the most valuable, what we all have, health, being in good health and being in a good, healthy community. So by this, I'm going to end. Health should be, I would like to give you the message that health is very important. So 3 key messages. There is health damage, and there is health-related limits of adaptation. So it has been proved that actually the body cannot adapt physiologically to 4-degree scenarios. So this cannot be. So we have to react, we have to take action. But of course, there are health co-benefits, and I also would like to draw your attention to, there is a workshop that we organized in Paris on climate change, health and communication, actually to really see how to raise awareness on that subject, how to engage the public. It's in September. And of course, there's a science conference organized by the UNESCO in July. There's another conference organized by the French Society of the Environment and Health in November, and of course the COP21, where that's why we are here. At the end, I just want to acknowledge my colleagues that I'm working with on that subject. Professor Rainer Sauerborn, Annelies Depoux, Sophie Pui, Corinne Kowalski, and Glenn Berner, because we are actually, some of them are specialized in communication, and we are currently also working on how to engage the people and change the behavior. So thank you very much.
Okay, so why don't I have the panelists join us up here in the front? And now this is the good part where we get to ask some questions. I'm going to take the liberty of being the moderator and ask 2 questions of the panel at the beginning, and then see if they have some questions for themselves, and then really get into the group questions. The first one, Ben, I think I will ask you about. You talked about the disease that you brought up in your presentation, Lyme disease, but I'm wondering if there's anything you want to say about something to make a Colorado connection, like on West Nile or anything else.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. Actually, West Nile is a really great example here in Colorado. We have seasonal cases of this every year. And the way that climate might be expected to contribute to West Nile outbreaks, when you think about it, the whole idea of having milder winters or earlier spring and then warm summers, this really feeds into the entire West Nile transmission cycle. What happens with at higher temperatures, mosquitoes go through the developmental cycle more quickly, and so if it takes under cooler temperatures 10 days or so, at optimum warmer temperatures it might be more like 7 days to go from egg to adult, and then so you got these cycles. More cycles per year with the earlier spring. And so what happens with West Nile virus is harbored in birds and small mammals. And so, and it's amplified as the season progresses. And so as you have more mosquitoes, an earlier start on the season, and you also have faster and higher replication rates of the virus in an infected mosquito, which makes it a greater, it raises its competency as a vector. So, you can have this longer transmission season, greater amplification of the virus, leading to greater risk to people that are living there. And so typically we'd have cases in birds, occurring in maybe in July and August, and then human cases occurring really more toward August and September. You speed that up, you amplify it, you basically ramp it up at higher temperatures. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And one more sort of general question for the panel that might introduce this. Some thought in the audience for asking more questions. And first of all, just thank you for sharing. I know that was a blur and you had to go very fast, and it's a fascinating topic. So looking forward to COP21 and thinking about this fascinating field that you're working in, whether it's ecosystems affecting human health or climate change affecting human health, there's this fascinating nexus to me. And that's what you were talking about, is that nexus. How do you see in your work or your experiences, are there anecdotal stories that you can tell or share, how that nexus is being perceived by the general public? Now, it's obvious to many of us because it's an audience generally captivated by climate change. But for the general public, making that nexus to climate change and the science of how it affects public health, I'm not too sure it's catching on. And so I'd like to just ask you to share your thoughts and some observations that you've seen during your studies or your travels or your discussions with your colleagues.
I think I can comment on it. As I said at the very end, with my colleagues, we are actually working on that, seeing how it is perceived, and also the press, the media, the role of the press and media in the climate change and health. And at the moment, we did some preliminary work on it, and we were looking at all the press articles from Le Monde, from the French newspaper, and we could see that only actually my colleagues did that. They looked at all the articles published on climate change and all the articles published on climate change and health, and actually they found around 5,000 articles stating climate change, but only 500 stating climate change and health. So there's really a big gap making the link between climate change and health. That's why I'm actually also here to advocate a little bit on that subject. So yeah, we are going to do that also for the New York Times, for example, for the moment we did it in the French context to see that. There's also like just the Lancet Commission that I said came out yesterday. They showed actually a diagram of how climate change, not climate change and health, but climate change is perceived by the population, by different countries. And what I actually found very interesting is that in the US, climate change is not really perceived as a threat, global threat. So they had different categories, a major global threat, a minor global threat, or not at all. And compared to European countries, in the US, actually, it's not that perceived such as a global threat.
Yeah, I concur, and maybe I could give a couple of examples to compare the USA and Europe. Often we are more aware of a situation when we have something a bit shocking that is happening. And the photo that I showed of Saint Louis and the Katrina hurricane has awakened a bit Americans to the reality of climate change. But the major point there was not really health, it was environmental damage. In Europe, we've had the heat wave that I've shown you in 2003, and this was directly related to health. And having 70,000 people dying in one summer, excess death in one summer, really made people shockingly aware of the connection between climate change and health. So that may be a big difference between the two continents.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is that, well, two things. One is that health was sort of the last frontier in this whole idea of climate change. I mean, we were the last to come to the table. If you look at the Global Change Research Program, you know, the working group on health was pretty newly formed. And climate change as science has been around quite a while, but health was sort of the last sector to come to the table. And secondly, in the field of medicine, and probably more specifically in the field of public health, we are very sort of crisis management oriented, you know, dealing with the crisis of the day. And everyone's phones are going off because we're all getting the same alert of severe weather, I think. But, you know, case in point. And I think that we are very crisis oriented in the way public health works, and we typically respond. And, you know, the whole idea of being more proactive rather than just responsive is a different way of thinking, and it has a tremendous implications, both financially and resource-wise. And then I guess that finally, and related to that, when I look at a disease like Lyme disease and many of the other diseases that we're working with at CDC, you know, we have 300,000 cases right now. And so I'm actually very consumed in what we can do to turn the corner on that. And if you ask me what do I want to do about Lyme disease 30 years from now, it's not going to be much different than what I'm doing about it right now, and trying to come up with a new vaccine, trying to validate effective prevention and control practices. And so in public health, we're very much attuned to the issues that are here right now. And sometimes those are a little bit overshadowing, you know, when you look at something that's still out in the future. And it just takes a different way of thinking.
Excellent, thank you. Just an opportunity between or amongst you all. Are there any questions you'd like to ask each other, since you don't get to talk to each other a lot? And if not, we'll move on, but go ahead.
Maybe I'll have a question for Ben, because I'm very much interested in the distribution of vectors of human diseases in relation with climate change. And you mentioned plague recently, and a while ago. And I didn't have the opportunity because we were starting to ask you whether you had predictions about that. I'd be interested to know about that. Yeah,
well, the plague is very in the news right now here in Colorado because we just had a confirmed case of a death to secondary pneumonic or septicemic plague in northern Colorado just recently. And, you know, I had to think when I was looking at Brad Udall's presentation, he mentioned the 100th meridian, and with the kind of a question, does that mean anything special to anyone in here? And immediately to me, I was thinking, absolutely. I mean, the 100th meridian is what we call the plague line. And because when you look at if you go to our website, www.cdc.gov/plague, look at distribution of disease, epidemiology, and you'll see a slide of all the reported cases of plague since 1970 in the US. Only 2 of those cases occur east of the 100th meridian. And one of those was a laboratory infection that occurred in Chicago, and the other was a case in Texas that actually was contracted in New Mexico. And all the rest of them run right up to that 100th meridian. So, you know, rainfall, you know, the climate has a significant impact on ecology and on disease ecology. And so, so what we sort of predict with plague, you know, in some of the general models is that we expect to see it move northward and upslope in terms into higher altitudes, and a lot of that is related to what we see in the ecology of plague, and you know, we can see seasonal impacts related to things like El Nino, southern oscillation events, and things like that. And so, and then also some of the models we've looked at are related to what we call trophic cascade models, and this was related to very damp winters, mild winters, and where you have a lot of greening and production of grasses with grains, and how that has an impact on rodent populations. And because these diseases are cycling in rodents all the time, and wild rodents, and prairie dogs, ground squirrels, and different types of mice. And those things, hantavirus is the same way, it gets amplified that way. And we've looked at some other downscale models and things like that in Uganda in a program that we have, and I'd be glad to share those with you. But we published most of this looking at the impact of rainfall and temperature on these diseases.
Okay, so this is a great topic. It can get very broad in spectrum and very detailed in both medical or other ecological sciences, but please feel brave to come to the microphone, use the microphone and step up and ask your questions about health and climate change, or the nexus, or even the questions you would recommend be asked at COP21 on this or any other topic. Thanks.
I'd like to ask Mark a question about biodiversity and industrial farming and monocultures that industrial farms use and how that affects biodiversity.
Thank you. Good question, and the answer is very simple. Industrial farming and monocultures are by definition the reduction of biodiversity. Monoculture means cultivating one species, when it has been shown repeatedly, scientifically, that cultivating several crops together or several plants together leads to an increase of the yield of the global yield for several reasons. The fact that we in Europe and especially here in the States have huge monocultures without the hedges that harbor a lot of biodiversity that is going to eat insect pests, for example. This is going to decrease a lot the yield. The fact that these monocultures are so huge is going not only to increase a lot the attraction to pests, but it's also be it's going to be a very fertile ground for diseases, for plant diseases, because you have a huge density of things that attract these diseases and then can be transmitted very easily. So on all grounds, industrial agriculture and monocultures are very efficient in terms of saving space and time and to gather products. But it's really not the most efficient in terms of increasing yield, and globally, it's really dramatic for biodiversity, and this is very well known. We know that we see much less species in terms of birds, in terms of insects, in terms of rodents, reptiles, than we used to even 50 years ago. Yeah, of course. Well, if you don't have hedges, for example, around the crops, all the species that can live only in bushes or in forests cannot. I mean, if you have a monoculture of any crop, almost nothing can live there, apart from a few insects that are then called pests, because of course they live upon the very species that the people want to harvest. So in terms of biodiversity, you have two things. You have the one crop that you want to grow and the species that you want to get rid of, and none of the rest. You would think that the pesticides, oh, you would, no, well, yeah, it's now being really, people are increasingly aware of the dramatic impact that pesticides have globally for biodiversity, that's for sure, and for health in general.
So Stephanie, you mentioned that the connection between climate change and health impacts has not been made quite yet in the media. How do you think we can change that? And do you think that eventually that may have an impact on politics, let's say?
How can we change? Actually, as I said at the very beginning, as Ben actually mentioned, the health sector is quite late in the fight against climate change. So also in the Lancet Commission, for example, the people that worked on the Lancet Commission worked, for example, since 1.5 years on the topic of climate change and health. So it's really, for us, coming from a public health perspective, it's quite new subject. And so we're trying to how do you say it, like to get a little bit faster and to rattraper le retard. Okay, catch up the delay. Exactly. So what can we change? Actually, this is what we currently doing. The last week, the Ministry of Health, the French Ministry of Health, organized a conference on climate change, health, and inequalities. So actually, at the moment, it's I won't say it's too late, but there is movement. So the Ministry of Health is getting involved in that question. So it was an international conference, getting experts from all countries to really talk about the issue climate change and health. We actually at our center currently, we are developing a MOOC, a massive open online course on the subject climate change and health, also in order to raise awareness, because MOOCs are publicly, open for everybody, and we are developing 3 MOOCs. One MOOC for policymakers, which is actually not really a MOOC because it's only for 2 days, because usually policymakers, they don't have a lot of time. And one MOOC in English, probably 5 or 6 weeks, and one MOOC in French, more in really focused on the African context. So I think this could be also kind of tool to raise awareness and to get the public, but also the policymakers involved. We're going to launch the MOOC on policymakers on the World Health Summit in Berlin in October. So we're going to launch it then. So the World Health Summit is it's a platform between the civil society, research community, but the policymakers will be there, and also the companies, the private sector. So we thought it would be a good opportunity. It will be before the COP21, and a good platform to actually launch that. So I think this could be a good tool. Continuing having workshops, seminars, conferences. Yeah, I think, yes.
You know, I'll say one comment here in the relevant here to the U.S. and it's on the bright side, I think, is that, you know, every 3 years or so, there's a national climate assessment that's required by law, and that came out, I think in 2013 was the year. I get it mixed up because it's so long in writing, and then it comes out finally, and you don't know, in 2014. Okay, so the health portion of that report was disappointingly small, and so there actually is a national climate assessment health report, an entire report that's been written. It was posted for a month for public comment. That just ended 2 weeks ago, I think, and I'm on the steering committee for that. And so there's actually, it will be, I think probably it's safe to say, the largest single report on climate change and health in the U.S. that's ever been done. And it's you know, large multi-federal effort, and it's got in writers from all different sectors, and it's been through public comment and NRC review, and we're dealing with public comments now, and then it will go to full agency review, and it should be coming out in maybe March or April of 2016, I think. So hopefully that will be a shot in the arm for this.
Another question from the audience?
Well, I'm interested in the solutions, and for the biodiversity problem, I was wondering whether you have ideas on ways to protect or to develop biodiversity. Recently, we had a discussion with people from the Smithsonian, and for the fisheries in particular, they are preparing kind of, well, they are looking for territories, islands, where they can protect from fisheries, places where they can renew the stock of fish and then invest other places in the ocean. Is there any other solutions of that type?
So I talked a bit about climate change and the impact on biodiversity. Well, I mentioned it, I didn't really talk about it. But climate change is one among many drivers of biodiversity loss. There's habitat destruction, biological invasions, overexploitation, pollution, you name it, there's a lot. And so there are many, many species and many drivers of biodiversity loss. So there are an infinity of solutions, both global and local, depending on the local situations. The entirety of these solutions are studied in a science that is conservation biology, and there are many of them. One common point to all of them, one common solution is information, education, communication. I think if people knew that on the planet there is between 5 and up to 100 million species, if people knew that we have discovered so far only 1.5 million of those species, we know almost nothing on the single most important richness of our planet. And if people knew that we are extincting the species at a rate that is so high that it's now described scientifically as the 6th extinction mass extinction in the history of the planet, if people knew how important biodiversity is for human beings, not in terms of just aesthetical or recreational or ethical value, but how as an utilitarian value for some of the aspects that I've mentioned, but for many others. If we knew that, I think we would divide solution much, much more quickly and much, much more efficiently. So I think communication, education, information is really the key point here.
I may just have a question. Just you said that there are different determinants of biodiversity loss. Do you have, I have no idea, but do you have any, can you compare the impact of climate change and any other, the attribution, you know, and giving it percentage?
No. Well, it's very difficult to put a number on the causes that we know very well. For example, habitat destruction, because we don't know how many species there are in the Amazonian forest. So when we destroy the forest, we don't know how many species we're losing. When we are fishing, trolling, and destroying coral reefs or the bottom of the sea, we don't know what is there. So we don't know what we're destroying. So it's even more difficult to compare between pollution and habitat destruction, for example. So climate change is in the future. So it's even more difficult to compare the current causes of biodiversity loss with the future one, because we only have models with uncertainty to estimate what we're going to lose. And also many species are affected by different causes together. So the species that will be affected by climate change will also be affected by overexploitation and by biological invasions. And sometimes there will be synergies between them. So it's really difficult to put numbers and to compare them. But globally, people say habitat destruction is the most important one. Biological invasion is second. And climate change is on the top of that, and it's not really ranked because it's quite new to ecologists, and we don't really know how to handle all the sources of uncertainties to put them with quantitative assessment.
So I want to come back to what you were just mentioning earlier with education. And I think that's where it's interesting to have French and the US side by side. The way we teach about, ecology, the value of Earth services, we are going to need the next generation to be very bright and very responsible and responsive to changes we've never seen before, as multiple generations have not seen. So what, as scientists, but potentially some of your educators too and teaching, what do you think we could do to increase the level of understanding and involvement and change in behavior in the new generation so that we don't face the wall so close and we take actions earlier? It's a broad question. Thanks.
I think it's a very, very important question, and I think if we had the answer, we wouldn't have any problem. I think part of the answer comes from trying to explain to the public that preventing the African rhino to get extinct. It got extinct. One species got extinct a few months ago. Such magnificent, charismatic species that we were not able to protect. That are during our lifetime. If we are not able to explain them that this is more important than what Kim Kardashian is going to wear next week, then we are failing. And for now, or not wearing. And for now, we don't have this solution. We don't know how to. Well, perhaps it comes from having the press more responsible. You've seen perhaps the initiative of The Guardian recently, which is an amazing initiative. So the editor-in-chief of The Guardian, major British journal, is retiring, and just before retiring, he thought a lot about his past, what he has done, and what he has failed to do. And he has publicly made a kind of an act of confession saying, I think I have not emphasized enough the problems of climate change. And before I go, I will really push hard on that. And they have laid a major information campaign on that. And that's, I think, both very courageous, very responsible, and perhaps one of the things that we need to have. And we need to have all the major newspapers and TVs taking upon this and stopping discussing about the amount of money that this sport guy is going to get by getting into this new club, and talking about the important stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I just wanted to make another comment, which we in public health, we always have difficulties as well. Telling people, for example, it's not good to smoke. I mean, but there's still a lot of people that keep on smoking. So I think we have the same problem with climate change, telling, okay, it's not good, but people still, I mean, they probably understand the problem, but they won't act. And I think it's probably a human problem that they don't really, they think which is actually happening now, but not really in the future. And I think we have probably to change the mentality and think also about our grandchildren and children and so forth, because for the moment we are acting now, it's like the lifestyle carpe diem. We do what is actually now good for us, and whatever, we don't really mind what's going on in 30 years if I have cancer or if the planet is getting worse. So I think this is also another point which we don't have the solution yet, but yes.
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments. I think that that our children are beginning to be taught, and these messages are beginning to take hold. My daughter corrected me once when I was brushing my teeth and left the water running a little bit too long, and so they're getting that, but that could be a lot better. And I think that changing the way we look at these things, really you have to institute it, with children in schools with modules that help them understand environmental stewardship and things like this, and grow up changing the way they think about those things. And it's very difficult to change the behavior of adults, and I think the other thing is helping people to understand our individual responsibilities and how one person's decision has an impact on the globe. And we don't see that. What does my vote count? I mean, that's basically the challenge. What really measurable impact can be seen if I bike to work 3 days this week, instead of driving my car? And I've heard some really ingenious ideas that people have had. Some colleagues of mine in Boulder, they've come out with this idea of an app, a smartphone app. And with that app, you can actually, you would be able to look at your carbon footprint, and if you do certain activities, you reduce it by such and such amount, and then take that into social marketing and networking and the whole idea of gaming and things like that, so that Boulder's competing with Fort Collins, and you log like tweeting, you log your information in on your smartphone. It's conglomerated with other people's information. It's scored and rated, and then you can see how your city's doing or your school is doing, compared to another one, and then have it incentivize it, so if you you can reduce your carbon footprint by a certain amount, maybe you could get a corporate sponsor, Amazon or someone who could give you a discount. And there are a lot of there's a lot of talk about things like this that that could raise awareness and also emphasize the co-benefits related to health. And there's been a lot of mention of that as well. So, but it's a challenge. It's really a challenge.
Excellent. I believe we're a little over our time now, and this was a very rich discussion. I think we're just now getting started up. Did we have one more? Do we have time for one more question? Did you have one? Okay.
Yeah, actually, my question was bridging between the first and the second roundtable. You mentioned earlier, I think one of you mentioned that the consumption and production of red meat contributes to greenhouse gases. I think earlier on someone said something about how much the agricultural industry uses water, and I was wondering, do you have any models that actually look into if a policy and change of behavior will actually impact on both from the water usage, but also the impact on climate change from the production of gases if you were to reduce those consumptions? I think one of the things I think from a nutritional point of view in the Western world and America in particular, we overeat red meat. So that would be kind of an easy, simple model to look at. But I'm wondering if that's been kind of studied.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna. Are you referring to to one of my slides that I presented, or is it a little bit different?
I think it may have been you, and actually I could branch out on other things. I think there's a lot of issues right now, discussion going on in the food industry. For example, I think you're talking about France. I think France implemented new law to actually use basically to reduce the waste of food in the supermarket. But from the beginning at the production level, there's also resource level of water, and then waste because the given fruit or vegetables is not meeting criteria, so you throw them away even though they are good for consumption. So there's a lot of more, I think, directions, but you may have mentioned something.
Yeah, and of course I'm more nutrition based, and it's true. Like the studies that you mentioned, or you were wondering if there are any modeling studies. For the moment, I mentioned a study coming from the UK. There are not a lot of studies, modeling studies, showing actually the what kind of the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that could reduce by changing the dietary patterns, or also what kind of health impact could we have if we change the diets. So from the moment, as far as I know, most of the studies are more located in Europe. I'm not aware of any study in the US, and currently I'm involved in a project, the same project in India. The Indian population, they're not eating a lot of meat or red meat, but it's a huge population, and they are actually currently in a nutrition transition. And so we are looking at that at the moment with colleagues from London. I don't know if I answered your question. Is there any? Yes?
So we do need to wrap up, and I need to introduce Chris to do closure, but I do think that there are probably separate reports or anecdotal stories that talk about methane reduction from cattle reductions, and then you could go into lots of vegetarian websites to identify some of those stories. But I think you're correct that they're not directly correlated or connected. It'd be a fascinating thing to do. The other thing about messaging on climate change, Laura Ferris, who is our climate change coordinator from EPA, has taught me that there's recent studies that say we need to stay positive. They're the most effective messaging, and show the opportunities, as others in other panels have given at futuristic industries that Mr. Udall presented, and that's what's going to get people on board and moving forward in implementation. Thank you all very much. I feel like we're just getting started, and so there'll be a closing comment now on what we're going to do next for those who can stay. Thank you so much.
Hey, I'm Chris Poulet, and I also work as a scientist for the CDC, a very small public health agency that's co-located around the country with the Environmental Protection Agency called ATSDR. That's my day job, and my night job is I'm a board member of the Alliance Française in Denver. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here tonight. The goal was to get you as an audience to hear some experts to discuss climate change and potential impacts on water and health. And I think as an audience, I really thank the speakers, but I think the audience has stepped up and really participated. So that was a great thing. I mean, I heard everybody gets different things, takes things home from at conferences in different ways. And what I took from this, the idea of an environmental problem being a wicked problem, to me was very interesting, and I hadn't heard that before. So I think I learned something for sure about that today. And I think the idea of education was brought up. I think it's very important. We do a lot of that in the work that we do, which involves exposure of the public to chemicals. And it's a very important thing, and it has to continue. So, but as a partner in this event and as a member of the Alliance Française and a board member, I just wanted to say a little bit about the Alliance. It's a worldwide nonprofit cultural and French language center founded in Paris in 1883. It has a network of 800 chapters in 137 countries, including 113 locations in the US, and it serves about 550,000 students overall who want to learn French. We have a chapter here in Denver, and so it's over on 6th and Galapagos. We actually have a building, and back in the day, they say that Molly Brown was actually a member of the Alliance Française. So those of you who know Molly Brown, she was one of the first members. But and anyway, so please come and visit us if you have a chance and participate in one of our many events. But you might ask, why is a French language and cultural center involved in a climate change conference. And there's a story behind that. First of all, the Alliance Française is part of and receives funding from the Science and Cultural Facilities District in Denver. And about 3 years ago, the science section of the French Consulate in Los Angeles asked if we would promote what's called a café scientifique, or a science cafe. And those of us at the Alliance that we're interested in science, we decided that we would go ahead and try to do that. So it's an informal venue for French-speaking scientists and technical experts from the Denver metro area to present their research in the French language with slides in English. So if you're interested in learning about French, or if you're a francophone, it's a good venue to hear talks about science, different topics in science, from climate change to Ebola to geology, different things. It's very interesting. So, and there are several of those in the Denver metro area, but we're the only ones that have one in French and English both. So, but before we go off to the lobby and have some food and drinks, which are graciously provided by the French government tonight, I just want to thank a few individuals and groups who made this event possible. First, thanks to all of you in the audience who came from many different locations around the Denver metro area, and we'll have to leave because it's raining outside and we have a nice Colorado thunderstorm going on. And then the speakers who came from way as far as Fort Collins in France. Also to Fabien Agenès and his colleagues at the science section of the French Consulate in Los Angeles, who was the primary organizer of the FACTS conference in Denver and a big supporter of our Café Scientifique. He actually provided some money for our refreshments, which is great because we need that. And I'd also like to add that the science advisor for the French Embassy in Washington is here tonight, Mina Pham, and several other members of staffs at different consulates in the West, as well as the Embassy in Washington. And please take the opportunity to speak with them. And also your speakers who are here, who will be out in the audience, and learn a little bit more. You know, if there was a subject that you are interested in, and now's the time to talk, because it's all about educating people who may be scientists but don't know about this particular topic. So I also wanted to thank, Philippe Marseille, who will be here a little bit later, who's our very energetic Alliance Française director, who's from Nice, France. And if you talk with him, he will have you wanting to speak French in like a minute. It's really interesting. Also, our board vice president, Lynette Hayat, is here, and she encouraged us in all our attempts at starting new events at the Alliance. And also wanted to thank Metro State University, and particularly Tom Check of the One World Water Center, who is very graciously offered to host this event along with MSU. And then also our other partner, Denver Water, who provided a speaker, which was great. And this, of course, the Denver Science and Cultural Facilities District, which makes a lot of our work possible with the Alliance Française. And also the French scientists and researchers who presented their work at the Café Scientifique over the past 3 years. And I really wanted to thank our volunteers. We have 3 volunteers tonight. Hope Dalton of Tri-County Health Department, Shun-Ping Chow of EPA Region 8, and Camille Ward, who is with the Boulder County Wastewater District. So after this, please go out and have some cocktails and food out in the lobby. So thanks.
No, it was good. I didn't know they had a person. It's really good to hear. Paying attention. Part of the talking about the demand, it's all supply and demand. Dryers, you're not going to think, yeah, I need to be certain driven by price. It's really challenging to sell the price. So water's precious resource. I think the fire appropriation law is going to be tested right now in California, and it's going to translate to Colorado. It's going to be really interesting to see that dynamics here. Nobody talked about it.
No, no, we talked about that. Maybe we can just.
For the West, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different implications.
Well, but to begin, that's kind of opening a can of worms.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about changing a couple of years.
Get your guns out. My water.
That's right. People will. That's where the NRA exists. My water.
Guns and water.
Take my water.
Donner mon salaire pour les 25 prochaines années et que ça dépendait pas de ma performance, mais que ça dépendait de mes phases et
Better find out. I'll see you in a minute.